Councilwoman Cabrera, we're live, so you can begin when you're ready.
I'll be with you in one moment. Okay, I'm here. Do we have all council members present? Great. Good afternoon. This is the first meeting of the Community Development and Urban Planning Committee for the 108th session of Wilmington City Council. My name is Maria Cabrera, a council member at large, and I am chair of the committee. At this point, I will ask council members to introduce themselves. Any council members that are present can introduce themselves, whether you're part of the committee or not.
Hi, I'm Nathan Field, 8th District Councilman.
Shané Darby, 2nd District.
Michelle Harley, 4th District.
Councilwoman Xanthia Alva, 3rd District.
Rashima Dixon at large.
James Spadola at large. Hello.
Chris Johnson, 7th District.
Loretta Walsh at large.
Not hearing any other council members, I do want to introduce the members of this committee. Our members, council members Bregetta Fields, Shané Darby, Yolanda McCoy, Nathan Field, and James Spadola. We have 2 items on the agenda, and we'll begin with legislation. We are considering ordinance number 21-006, an ordinance to amend Chapter 34 of the City Code to revise certain enforcement provisions and provide civil fines for owners of rental properties. I have a substitute to present, substitute number 1 to ordinance number 21-006. The minor changes to the original ordinance are, based on feedback from various individuals, we have included these amendments, and they are additional whereas clauses committing to a discussion of financial and educational programs to support enforcement efforts during the budget process. This can be found on page 2. A requirement that an invoice will be sent to the property owner when civil fines are assessed. This is in section 34-37D on page 4. A requirement that the violation notice contain the name of the inspector and instructions on how to contact the inspector for additional information or to schedule a meeting. 34-38A, this is in section 34-38A, number 6, and this is located on page 5. And last but not least, a requirement that the violation notice also be mailed to the property manager designated on the rental dwelling business license, section 34-38B, and this is on page 5. Following the legislative items, we will have a presentation by representatives of the H.O.M.E.S campaign. The format for the meeting is the following. I will ask representatives from the administration to introduce themselves and discuss the legislation. This will be followed by questions to the administration by council members. At the conclusion of council's questions, we will have a public comment period. Any member of the public will have 3 minutes to comment on this specific piece of legislation. I will ask members of the public to please introduce themselves and the council district in which they reside. I want to remind you that this is a comment period, not a question and answer session. If you still have a question, I will ask the administration representatives to respond at the end of the public comment period. If the public comment period is abused, the chair may exercise greater discretion in limiting public comment. Before I turn it over to the administration, I wanted to make some brief comments. When I first served on council 8 years ago, I landed into looking at the issues facing our community and our neighborhoods. It started with me visiting the sites of where a shooting had occurred at that particular moment. Sometimes when I went, the police were still there investigating. Other times I drove by to look at the area. What I did see was that a majority, I'm not saying all, but a majority of the shootings were all taking places where there were vacant properties and neighborhoods that were downtrodden, dilapidated properties. I would literally drive around the block to see what kind of neighborhood it was. In addition, not always, I would see that there would be a liquor store. Not in every case, but in the majority of the cases there was. And then the third incident that I noted was that there would be a corner store. And I'm not saying just regular stores. These were stores where there was congregation, there was activity, there was things going on. So I came to the conclusion that when you don't have enough eyes and people aren't paying attention, or you look at communities where it just appears that people don't care, that those are the communities where crime seems to fester. That's where crime happens because there's no one watching. And the city has taken great actions, and we still need to do more in terms of addressing the vacant property issues. This legislation does not include vacant property. It's not changing anything right now, but there are some amendments that are coming forth that are going to change that. So we're going to work on that separately. We listened to you, the public. We've been looking at this bill as it was called the Blight Bill, but it is actually a housing reform bill, and it's a neighborhood stabilization bill to hold people accountable that own properties in the city of Wilmington. And there was a lot of discussion, a lot of controversy. People felt that it was too much, that we were going after property owners, not just the renters and the vacants, and that it became convoluted. So by listening to the public, to everyone that gave public comment during those last 3.5 years, this is a simplified version of one part of what we need to do to reverse what is happening in our city, to have accountability. Because what we have in the books right now under the criminal system is an ineffective law. If it's going to take 9 to 12 months to be able to hold anyone accountable for enforcing the code violations that exist in our city and allowing renters to live in deplorable conditions because landlords who are business owners are making money collecting rent but not fixing those properties, that is an issue, and that is something that we have to take care of. Many times the city is blamed because the inspectors aren't taking action. Once the inspector goes out and does the code violation, we can't force the landlord to fix it, and they can go to court. It's an extended process. So what this does, changing it from criminal to civil, it shortens the time that we can hold those landlords accountable. For those that feel that this legislation is too constrictive, that it's doing something wrong, it is not. What it's doing, it's giving people the opportunity to, one, fix their properties. It's holding them accountable. They have 30 days. They can ask for an extension if they need more time to fix the properties. They can talk to the inspector, to the commissioner. Those venues of communication are open. And after speaking to many of the landlords, they have never had an issue with the city of Wilmington extending time and working with them. This is going after the landlords that completely ignored the code violation. The fees have been stabilized to stay at one amount, $250, instead of escalating. And instead of getting fined daily, now it's in blocks of 7. And that's only for the people who choose to neglect and not fix the code violation. We've heard things that people are going to move away if we're enforcing the law. These laws already exist. They're in the books. It's the cost of doing business. A landlord who has a property that's an asset is not just going to pack up and leave or vacate that property when they're currently making money from a renter. You know, a lot of these code violations are small things and minor things that should be fixed. And of course, with the more dangerous things like plumbing and roofing, those are things that would require immediate action. So with that synopsis, I invite you to take a look at the ordinance, at the amendment. It is an amendment to Chapter 34 of the city code. We're not changing or adding new rules or laws. This already exists in its criminal version. What we're doing is taking a little bit more of the control where the city can actually go forward and execute and make sure that the code violations are being dealt with. It's basically a fix it or fine, and then register your rental properties, because we have many rental properties that aren't registered. Register your rental property, because that's what every business owner in the city is required to do. And we are giving people time to register their properties before they are getting fined. We're also going to be doing a public relations campaign to educate the landlords as well as the tenants and the renters so that they know their rights and what they need to do to prepare for when this ordinance goes into effect July 1st of 2020. So with that, I am going to turn this over to the administration.
Good evening, Council. My name is David Sofrin, and I'm a policy analyst in the Mayor's office. I have a brief opening comment, but before I make it, I'd like, if possible, Jeff, Starkey, and Rose Tassone to introduce themselves as well.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Starkey. I'm the Commissioner of License and Inspection.
Good evening. My name is Rose Tassone DiNardo, and I'm an attorney with the City of Wilmington.
Okay. Well, first, I want to say thank you to Council for giving myself and my colleagues here the opportunity to come before this committee this evening to speak about the reform legislation before us. I think as every person present tonight knows, the City of Wilmington faces a wide variety of serious issues relating to housing, and a long-term deliberate effort on the topic of housing is necessary to achieve the overall goal that I think everyone's aiming for, which is to improve the quality of life for the residents of our city. We know there's no silver bullet quick solution to the housing issues we're facing. The legislation before us tonight represents just one proposed solution to one particular issue, and it's a critical one: the efficiency and the effectiveness of our housing code enforcement process. Over the last 4+ years, the city has sought to explain that the current criminal process is considerably too slow and often does not create the desired outcome of having the violations fixed by the property owner. Rather, due to a number of factors, including but not limited to the relatively drawn out current criminal process, the violation issues often remain unresolved. A civilly enforced system on rental properties, which is what this legislation proposes, would much more rapidly bring about a conclusion to enforcement action, as well as the potential consequence for irresponsible landlords ignoring that action, and will push landlords who are being irresponsible to either fix the violations or risk losing their rental property. As the public debate has evolved over the last 4 years, the sentiment from a previous council, the current council, as well as the public, has been quite clear that one sweeping piece of comprehensive housing legislation was not appropriate. Rather, council and the public made it very clear that they prefer an approach where each piece of legislation deals with an individual issue, allowing for a debate on that proposed policy change one at a time. The administration, and I believe council as well, heard that sentiment and has worked to therefore develop the legislation before us tonight. One initial piece of ordinance, certainly not the last one, that offers one substantive solution to one particular significant problem. Again, we understand it does not remedy. Administration is excited and ready to have an open debate on those proposals with council and with the public. And if those ideas have merit, then we expect those items to come before council in the near future. Our housing code, I'll just say this to conclude, our housing code exists to ensure that our residents are able to live in safety in their homes. We believe that this ordinance represents a strong step in the right direction towards achieving that goal by allowing the city to better hold irresponsible landlords accountable through faster and more effective code enforcement. I appreciate you letting me make this statement, and I think at this point, Commissioner Starkey will have some brief remarks as well.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Cabrera and other City Council members. I'd just like to say a few things, and Chairwoman Cabrera, you mentioned it earlier. The only thing that this legislation changes, is the criminal to civil, and particularly for rental properties. All of our other processes remain the same. Violations remain the same, sending notices remain the same, re-inspections remain the same, and working with constituents, the most important thing remain the same. Our ultimate goal is to get compliance because everybody wins when that occurs. I would like to speak from a code enforcement perspective. Inspectors often come to me frustrated with the court system. And one, for the length of time it takes to get resolution, and two, because they're getting labeled by tenants for doing nothing, when quite frankly, their hands are tied. Inspectors' main goal is to work with constituents rather issue criminal summons or fines. They often tell constituents that they'd rather see them put the money into making the repairs than issuing summons or fines. Again, fines don't do anything because everyone doesn't do any good because it doesn't solve anybody's problem. Getting compliance solves everyone's problem. And I'd just like to thank you for allowing me to make a couple comments. Thank you.
You're welcome. At this point, Rose, if you can introduce yourself from the law department.
As I said, my name is Rose Tassoni DiNardo, and I'm the Deputy City Solicitor for the city, working in the law department.
At this time, I would also like to acknowledge Councilwoman Yolanda McCoy, who has joined the meeting.
I
Now,
would also like to be recognized too, Madam Chair.
oh,
Bregetta
Councilwoman
Field.
Field has
Thank
also
you.
joined the meeting, and both Councilwoman McCoy and Fields are members of this committee.
Could you recognize First District Councilwoman Linda Gray also?
Councilwoman Linda Gray is in the room. Thank you for joining us this evening. So at this point, I would like to turn it over to our council members, both those that are in the committee and those that are present, to ask any questions in reference to the legislation. The amended legislation was sent earlier to the council members. So at this point, I open it up for members. Also acknowledge that our council president is on board as well. I'm not sure if he said anything, but he is joining us this evening. Thank you, President Congo.
Thank you.
Are there any council members that have any questions on the legislation before we turn it over to the public for public?
Yes, Madam Chair, my hand is up.
Okay. Councilwoman Harley, please proceed.
Thank you. First of all, great job on doing the overview and summary regarding the legislation. I was thinking that maybe it would be a good idea to explain what happens currently today when a homeowner receives a citation or violation and it goes through the court system. As we know, the biggest part or one of the major changes in this legislation is moving it from criminal to civil. And I think having a good understanding as to what is happening and why we're moving it from criminal to civil, I think would be helpful, because I've heard so many different stories about why we're moving it from criminal to civil. So I thought this would be an opportune time to share that to the appropriate person, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that excellent question. Could I have a member of the administration that can speak to that, please?
Sure, I think that would be best handled by if Commissioner Starkey can lay out to the council member's question, the basic process of how it currently takes place.
Yes, I could do that. Then I'll turn over the roads that go from our process to the court process. What generally happens is whether we get a complaint or whether it's a systematic inspection, the inspector is Can you hear me?
Yes.
The inspector is assigned the complaint or either doing a systematic inspection. Once they identify their violations, they in turn have to come back and develop that violation sheet, which is then sent out certified to the property owner. We have to get acknowledgement that the person has actually received a violation. So it's sent out certified. If they don't claim it within 10 days, it's sent back to us, at which point we have to post it on the property as our official notice. Once we post it on the property, we take a picture of it to verify that we've actually serve that person that notice. And whatever the time period is for the violation, and they vary from 3 days to 30 days, depending on how severe it is, then that's the time period in which they have to correct the violation. Typically what happens is once the person has it, they contact the inspector, they review the issues, or either meet at the property to review what's going on, what the expectation is from that person from an inspector standpoint. That time period is given. If they require an additional time to correct it, because we realize and we understand that people don't have the resources to correct it. They may have to hire a contractor, and we understand that. So if they ask for an additional time, the inspector gives them additional time to correct it. They put that in writing to us. And that doesn't have to be extravagant. It could be an email, it could be a handwritten document. If additional time is given, then that time is given and the inspector allots that time. And once that time is expanded, then the inspector goes back out and do a re-inspection to determine whether or not it's been corrected. If it hasn't been corrected and they've exhausted all the means possible to get it corrected, then the inspector has to write a criminal summons for it. Then we have to do that through the office, which is then inputted into the Delta system, which is a state system. Once that's inputted into the system, the court notifies us that the criminal summons is ready. The inspector has to go down to the court system, verify that the information that he presented is correct, and then signs for that document. And at that point, the state system or the court system schedules a hearing for the court case. Now that could be 3 months, 6 months, it depends. At that point, then the law department is involved in terms of getting ready to prosecute the case. And Rose, if you can add from that standpoint, your process from there.
Sure. The one thing I will add to the commissioner's process is that at the beginning, when the violation notice is issued, there is an opportunity to appeal the violation notice. So I just wanted to note that. But once the summons is in the court system, it is scheduled for an arraignment and a trial. And at that point, the individual would come into court. Majority of individuals are not represented; they are pro se. If it is a corporation, they are required to have an attorney present because these are criminal matters. And once it's in court, a matter can be continued. Either the individual can request a continuance, or the individual and the city can agree together to continue a case in order to have repairs completed. But eventually it is scheduled for a trial. And at that point, the individual has the option of pleading guilty or no contest. If they plead guilty or no contest, that's a plea. We work out a plea agreement and go in front of the judge, and a fine is imposed. The individual can plead not guilty, in which case there is no plea agreement. That individual would have a trial in front of the judge. And if the person is found guilty, then a fine is imposed.
If I can add one thing of note, and if it's already been said, I apologize, but quite often, council member, to your question, the process ends without the issue being resolved. And the point that Commissioner Starkey made in the beginning, the priority here is ideally, first and foremost, to have the issue fixed and on the street at the property. And so when we go through this drawn out process that both individuals spoke of, unfortunately, it will sometimes end with actually nothing being resolved. It's issued, and then L&I goes and starts the process over again.
Well, thank each one of you for your response. And I think that it is very helpful, because that's the whole purpose of why there's been a request to amend the legislation, because when they go to the criminal court, nothing basically gets done. So thank you. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Sorry, trying to find my microphone here. Thank you very much, Councilwoman Harley. That really gave everyone that overview, because there might be some people in the audience who have questions. Is there another question from any of the council members?
Yes, actually, I had my hand up as well.
Yes, acknowledge Councilwoman McCoy, who's also a member of the committee. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Unfortunately, I have not gotten a chance to read the substitute. I did read the original draft. Wanted to find out if there was, like, if these are just small changes. Wanted to find out exactly what those changes were.
Thank you.
Sure, I can try. So I believe one of the changes is the inclusion of an additional whereas clause to speak to the broader purpose of the legislation and then the larger housing issues. I believe, and Rose will correct me if I'm wrong, one of them relates to ensuring that once, should a landlord be cited for a code violation and unfortunately not fix it, and a civil fine be imposed, that there would be a notice sent to that landlord in writing informing them that the fine has been imposed. So just, you know, an additional layer of notification. And I believe the third one related to ensuring that to the extent a landlord has a property manager for their property and that name and contact info is on file, that L&I will send notifications of the violations to that property manager, because sometimes, you know, they are the ones who are supposed to be fixing it. And we want to try to keep them in the loop. So Rose, if I missed anything, let me know.
The only one I think that you didn't mention is that the substitute does contain a provision that within the violation notice itself, when it is first sent to the property owner, that there's a requirement that L&I provide the name of the inspector and instructions on how to contact the inspector to request further information or a meeting.
Thank you. And Councilmember McCoy, those changes were put in at as if I'm remembering correctly, as part of the communications that I think the administration and Councilmember Cabrera had with some members of the public.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have for now.
I have Councilwoman Gray from the 1st District with her hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have not read the revised either, so maybe these questions have been answered. But in section 34-37, violations and penalties, they keep mentioning the court. What court are they discussing? It says shall be not less than $5,000, which shall not be suspended upon conviction of a violation in this chapter. The court may order the defendant to correct the violation by a date certain. Are we also, besides the civil, taking them to criminal court?
Who would like to answer that question?
Rose, I think, would be best able to answer that one.
I can speak to that. So section 3437, and Councilwoman lays out both processes. It's the criminal process, which, remember, still applies to homeowners. And then subsection D is what applies to the rental properties, and that lays out your civil penalty. So they're both contained in 3437, but subsection A indicates that with the exception of subsection D, which is your rentals, everybody else is under the criminal system. And so that's where you have A, B, and C, and then the civil is D.
Okay, thank you very much. It just wasn't clear to me that that's what A is. And as you know, I'm pretty familiar, but it wasn't clear to me in reading it. And then I had another section that related to mobile homes, and I know that's not really relevant to Wilmington, but you crossed out the last line where it says violations of this section shall be punishable as provided in section blah, blah, blah. Well, how are they going to be punished now?
So you'll notice, Councilwoman, that it's actually a couple sections. I want to say it does start on page 7 8, and 9. Those sections that are deleted are only penalties. And so one of the purposes of this legislation is to eliminate inconsistent or duplicative penalty sections. So some sections have, over the years when the code has been amended, for whatever reason, separate penalty sections have been put in there. They've become somewhat either inconsistent or sometimes duplicative. So what we've done is I've gone through the chapter and I've deleted all the individual penalty sections that are inconsistent with the section that the general penalty section that we just discussed. And so when the section itself doesn't have a penalty section, it reverts automatically to the general penalties, whether they're criminal or civil.
Without stating that's stated, because it doesn't say here, usually it says refer back to so-and-so for violations, and cross that line out.
Yes, it doesn't need to say that because the general penalty provision at 3437 indicates that anyone who violates this chapter is subject to these fines unless there's a different one that's specifically provided for. And that's why I deleted those other ones that are inconsistent. So now everything will fall under the general penalty provision.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to make a statement that the most important thing that was stated is that with the criminal, things rarely got fixed. They would come through court and they would be fined, but the problem wasn't fixed. And I think that's what we're trying to do here, is to really get the property fixed. And then once they paid their fine, if you wanted to file again against them, that would be the only way you could really go forward and try to make them fix whatever the violation was initially. Thank you. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman Gray. And I just wanted to add that yesterday we did have a Zoom meeting with the members of the H.O.M.E.S campaign, and that was an issue that was addressed. And the commissioner basically made it very clear, look, this isn't about money. This isn't about the fines. You know, the city could care less about them paying the fines. What we want to see is the code violation fix. That's what has to happen. The fines are a way of holding people accountable and giving them a sense of urgency that they get it done. And by, making the process faster and quicker, that means that now they can't sit on this and find the normal loopholes that have existed. And you yourself, having worked in the judicial system, recognize this. And I appreciate you making those comments, but that's really the purpose of this legislation, that we're holding people hostage in their homes that are not being fixed. And this accelerates the process for them to take action. I also see that we have Councilwoman Dixon and Councilman Nathan Fields. I'm not sure who raised their hand first, but whoever would like to go first, Councilwoman Dixon, maybe ladies before gentlemen.
Oh, thank you, Chairwoman Cabrera. I just wanted to thank you for the overview also, and then also answering a lot of the questions that I had sent and submitted early on. I did still have a couple more questions, and it's probably more so directed to the license and inspection element. And I know it's probably more the logistical part as far as the actual the workings of the bill if it actually passes. But I wanted to just had a few questions, and Commissioner, I can send you my questions too as well. But I'll just kind of do the major ones. That way I'm not holding up the process. So one, if you could just explain what the current plan is for inspection, since I know we didn't do a lot due to COVID currently on rental inspections, when the timeline of getting them back started again, and then how many we anticipate doing. And then if there is a way for us to get a report, for example, I know that was an element in the previous legislation about reporting back to council quarterly regarding how the efforts are going. And, just seeing to make sure that there's some interfaith and some accountability if we can be helpful in that process.
If I can say one thing before, I think nearly all of those can best be handled by the commissioner. But to your last question first, so our hope and what we plan to do should the ordinance be passed is we're going to utilize the data that LNI currently collects regarding the dates of when a violation is issued and if it's complied with, when it was complied with. And the idea is to take that data and should the ordinance become law, use the same data points and same data sets after its implementation to try to show not just to LNI, but to the mayor's office and to council that the faster enforcement process resulted not just in a faster result, but also in greater compliance. And to those other questions, I think Jeff can best jump in.
Well, I mean, just before I start, I just wanted to add, I mean, as I explained the steps on how we actually do the process, I did mention that some of those steps will be eliminated as a result of us going to a civil penalty. We won't have to go to court to sign anything. We won't have to sit in the court for half a day trying to wait for a case to be heard. So those are man hours that will get to be utilized for something more productive. But in terms of how the plan is going to work, obviously COVID has stopped us from doing any rental inspections at this point, just for the safety of our inspectors. However, we still are doing tenant complaints if they call. We have protocols for in the event that we have to go into particular properties. So we are doing those. And what we've done, I think it was last year, we were on the road before COVID hit. We were somewhere in the 1,500 range in terms of rental inspections. So we were doing pretty good. We started gearing up and we had a good pace at one point. Then all of a sudden COVID hit, so we shut down just to protect our employees. So based on when COVID is over, that's when we'll decide when we get back in there, and we're working with HR and the unions to kind of develop a plan for that process. And certainly we can provide quarterly, reports once we get back rolling again.
And if I can add one thing to the commissioner's point, obviously, although this ordinance does not directly speak to, the discussion of which inspections are done or how they're triaged or what priority or anything like that. Obviously, there's a hope that, as I said in the opening statements, that we can have subsequent ordinances that dive into exactly that issue to make sure that as LNI does, and hopefully post-COVID continues to do more rental inspections, that they're as efficient as possible in getting them done that have the biggest, or I should say the best outcome.
Thank you, David, also for the explanation as far as the data piece. I think that's a huge piece that I think will be good for us to be able to see that process kind of in real time. And then also, thank you, Commissioner, for answering my question. Just had one more, and as far as I know, one of the complaints from landlords previously was that having some type of quicker process from onboarding, for example, of applying for a license or getting online as far as being able to pay a bill or any of those capacities. I know there's a number of unregistered properties that we're aiming to get on board. Is there a total number that you guys are looking for? I know it's a large number of unregistered currently, but I just want to know if there was a number that we're out of that we're thinking of trying to aim for, and then how much revenue do we think we could generate from that?
So obviously the amount of revenue, and by revenue, I assume you're referring to the rental business license, is going to depend on the number of unknown rental properties and how many units they have. What I can tell you is that we have begun to utilize, and this is a practice that other cities do, it's not anything particularly revolutionary, where we utilize county parcel data. So owner's address, street address of the parcel in question, as well as the owner's name, whether it's an individual versus a corporate entity. And there's a variety of sort of common sense analytical steps that we can take to try to identify rental properties in residential zoning areas. Everything from looking to see if Joe Schmo is listed as the address, his home address matches the street address, but it also does for 7 other properties in the city, that's a red flag. Or if a property isn't registered yet, it has the corporate sounding words in it, LLC, partnership, corporation, things like that. We try to do that analysis citywide for all residential district parcels. And then we take it and compare it to Jeff's current data. So we compare it to what Jeff currently has in terms of known registered rentals, the people who have come into the office and gotten them registered. And the delta is the population that we can reach out to. Jeff can speak to the fact that he's begun doing this already with his staff, and he can talk to what the reaction's been from the people once they get that phone call from LNI.
Yes, thank you, David. I mean, we've been doing this for the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, as we do rental inspections, when we were full-fledged into rental inspections, the way we did them is we targeted certain areas, census tracts, as we would call them. We would mail out letters to those census tracts, and we would pick up a lot of unregistered vacant property, I mean, not vacant rental properties. In most cases, once we notify people that our records indicate this may be a rental property, they would automatically just come in. We had very little objections in terms of people coming in and just getting a license. So we've been very successful. I think somewhere around 1,000 last year that we picked up just as a result of just looking at the database, looking at the addresses, seeing if they were different than what the addresses of the homes, and then we would send them a letters. So we do that every day, all day long. So, I mean, we have a person that just combs the database and looks at that. So we're picking up rental properties all the time. And we mentioned we're going to do some kind of campaign to kind of reach out to individuals, just kind of alerting them that if you have a rental property, you have to register it, or you have to get a license for it. So we've been very successful with those in the last 3 or 4 years, just doing those. But obviously we can do it better if we do it just citywide, outreach, and hopefully we'll do that.
Thank you. That's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you for those excellent questions, Councilwoman Dixon. I know that I have Councilman Fields next, and then Spadola and Yolanda. I do want to add, before I proceed to my council members, that the city has currently identified 7,000 properties that are potential rental properties that are not registered. So what the administration has committed to doing is a public outreach campaign, public relations and outreach campaign to, first of all, educate both renters and property owners as to the proceedings, how they, need to do this. This is part of the law, but some people just don't know, and how they should go about registering their property. There are not going to be any fees enforced, and they're going to be given time, kind of like an amnesty period, to be able to register those properties. We just want them to be registered. And that way they have that knowledge. We've done the outreach. We want to make sure that the renters also know that their rights and their responsibilities, so that if they feel that something's not being done right correctly by their landlord, they would let us know. As the commissioner mentioned, because of COVID, the inspections have been to a minimal. It's really when a tenant calls, but many times they don't even know to call or where to call. Through feedback that we've gotten working with the community and hearing about this legislation, there's some great ideas that came right from the Landlord Association, where they mentioned, just look at the water bills and see who's getting the water bills versus where the property is located. Pretty clear that they're probably rentals, and the owner's the one getting the water bills. So if it's not going to the same home and it's not registered as a rental, look there. You can also look where people are getting the parking fines, because if they haven't been given a tenant landlord document or a lease to show that they're renting, and they're maybe renting under the radar, they're going to end up getting parking tickets for extending the time in those neighborhoods. So those are ways that we can start looking at that low-hanging fruit to see where are these unregistered rentals, and start doing that public relations campaign. We're not going to come with the heavy hand of the city. We're going to say, listen, these are our rules. This is the code. You need to register your property. If you don't do it within a certain time, then you're going to get hit with that $500 violation. So I think we're really trying to take a holistic approach on how we can spread the information and the news, and how we can do this. And that this is just one part how we can start reforming how we do things when it comes to housing. And if we can proceed now to Councilman Fields. Thank you.
Fields or Field?
Councilman Field without an S on the end.
Thank you, Councilwoman Cabrera. I just have, so I have read the ordinance with an open mind, and one thing that I have noted is that it seems actually fairly limited in scope. And it seems to me, from my reading, that the primary purpose is to speed up the enforcement process of the housing code and to ensure that we hold landlords accountable if they don't fix the issue. But as I read it, it seems like the unique new added value is the focus on speeding up the enforcement mechanism. Am I correct to understand it that way? And Councilwoman Cabrera, could you or perhaps members of the administration speak in a few sentences about what exactly it's doing to speed up the process of enforcement?
Sure. So, Councilwoman Cabrera, if it's okay, I can try to answer that one.
Yes, that is fine, or the law department.
So from a practical perspective, what you essentially said is spot on. Our hope is that every code violation we issue will be resolved by the property owner, the landlord. And if that's the case, then no fines apply and the enforcement is academic. If they're making good faith efforts, I think Commissioner Starkey has said over and over again that the inspectors will apply good faith extensions to try to work with them. But in the event that somebody, frankly, is just ignoring the housing code, and in the event that they make no good faith effort to try to reach out and explain why there needs to be a delay, it's important that the city has some mechanism to essentially push them forward. Fines are already applied under the current criminal process. A fine would be applied under the civil process. The difference is, and we hope it doesn't come to this, we really don't, but in the event that code violations exist, the quality of the residents, in this case, the tenant's life is being hurt by the fact that the property isn't being maintained and the fines are there and they build up, the landlord obviously runs the risk of the rental property being sheriff sailed. And we hope it doesn't get to that. But the mechanism of a fine is really designed to push the landlord, an irresponsible landlord, I should say, to ultimately do the right thing and fix the property. Obviously, a rental property is it's a for-profit business. You're making money, and we understand that there are certain times when landlords, even though they're running a business, have some issues with fixing the problems. But we'll work with them in those cases. But if there's simply no response whatsoever, we need an enforcement system that moves more rapidly. And if Jeff's got anything to add to that.
And I'll just add one little thing. I mean, in the civil side of it, we control the outcome. The criminal side, we don't control the outcome. We have to depend on the court to schedule a case. We have to depend on the court. If the court says we give you an extension, continuous, then we're not in control of it. If on the civil side, if someone doesn't respond to our issues, we can expedite, fines within, 30 to 45 days versus waiting for a court case or a court hearing or a court date, and we have no control over it. Civil side, we control it. Criminal side, we don't control it.
Thank you. That answers my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. At that point, we are going to proceed with Councilman James Spadola, and then we have Councilwoman McCoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question is for the administration. So I'm curious, if you're a good landlord who takes care of your property, takes care of your tenants, how will this legislation affect the good landlords, many of whom I see on the call with us tonight?
And to be clear, we've had conversations with representatives of many of the proactive landlords who are, you call them, they're the good landlords, as you say, and they've been engaged in this process to their credit. So essentially, if somebody fixes the issue of the housing code violation at their property, then there's no fine applied. And so this whole debate about whether it is a criminal process that results in a fine or a civil process that results in a fine is academic. They won't be facing a fine. Again, it's only when there's just no action happening that the city needs to have an enforcement mechanism to ensure the quality of housing in the city. And we hope it doesn't come to that. But as Jeff has pointed out, waiting for a year for a single code violation to go through a process, only to often have it not fix the issue and then start it all over again, that's not a system. I mean, it doesn't work. And that's just the plain way of putting it.
Okay. So what percentage of landlords in the city would you see this regulation having a drastic effect on if it were passed? Presumably this would be the bad. So I'm basically asking, what percentage of landlords would you deem as slumlords in the city?
Sure. So I'll try to answer it. I'm sure I think Jeff's itching to answer as well. So the word slumlord, obviously we hear it quite a bit, and to be honest, it means different things to different people to one degree or another. I would say that really we do have the ability to analyze all the violations issued by L&I, as well as the percentage that are not fixed, and we can dig deeper into that to see just how many landlords are not fixing a certain percentage, let's say, of the violations of their property. But I think it's really going to depend on the behavior of the landlords. There are plenty of people who may have 1 or 2 code violations that doesn't make them a slumlord. On the other hand, Jeff will sometimes see properties where his inspectors go out and 15 violations are issued, and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no response to any of them.
And I think, I don't have a particular number, but we analyze it based on areas. We have some areas with 20% compliance, which is outrageous. So depending on the area that you're in, and I know some names. I don't have a specific number on the landlords, but we look at compliance rate as we relates to the inspectors. When we see 20% compliance, that's outrageous, absolutely outrageous. So it's not specific to any one person, but there are landlords out there that just don't respond.
And what I can add on to that,
majority of the landlords not responding, are they even city residents?
So we could. I'm sorry.
I don't know. I would have to go back and look at the data just to see where their addresses are. A lot of them are LLCs in most cases, and people have gotten very smart in terms of putting them in LLCs. They've gotten very smart in terms of not accepting our certified letters. So some landlords are very, very keen in terms of how to maneuver the system. So,
and just to add to that, I would say that we have begun analyzing by geography. So whether it be neighborhood or council district, not just the percentage of properties that may be rental, but also the degree to which there's code compliance by council district or by neighborhood. And unfortunately, although it varies greatly, Jeff's point is spot on that when we have some areas where 80% of code violations don't get fixed, they're just, a fine is applied, I suppose, at the end of the criminal process. That is a lot of manpower and effort that our inspectors have to go through. And nobody gets more frustrated than our inspectors when they see such a high percentage of their work resulting in a fine, but not fixing the problem.
If I could just say one more thing, and then I'll turn it over, Madam Chair. Sorry for taking up the time. As a former police officer, I look at this somewhat similarly to when we took marijuana charges out of the criminal court and moved them to civil violations. That was progress. That was becoming more in line, because I don't think somebody should have a criminal record for chipped paint. So it's good that we're not going to be criminalizing that behavior anymore if this were to pass. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for that thoughtful discussion. At this point, I would like to have Councilwoman McCoy make her comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually have more of a question rather than a comment. And it was basically that number that Commissioner Starkey actually has stated, that there's a possible 7,000 potential unregistered rental properties, and and I guess however many owners to those 7,000 properties. So my question is more so about the that outreach to, because you said that once you kind of locate or identify that a place is being rented and it's not registered, that more than likely the owner of that property is a little bit more easier with coming in and registering the property. My question is, how do we kind of marry that piece to inspections? Because I don't know whether or not, do we know whether or not these 7,000 properties are actually safe? Now, if they're coming in willingly on their own, that means that no one maybe identified that the properties are actually having issues. So is there anything, I've actually had this conversation with Ms. Chair, Madam Chair, about making certain that if we actually now have them coming into us and making certain that they are doing their due diligence and registering their property, that how do we marry that to now not a pre-rental, because even if it's someone already in there, that, we should not have to wait until there's a movement. And we've already heard before from the landlords that pre-rentals really hold them up. But just to make certain that everything is actually safe within the property that they just registered, is there any way to try to marry those two together, that outreach in that rental inspection?
Well, that's a good point. And typically what happens when they come in and get their business license, we schedule an inspection for them.
Okay.
We try to schedule it within 30 days to get in there and take a look at the property.
So that is actually already in the book. So that we've had that discussion before, and that is already in the books. And as people are doing this now, they can have that done.
Right. I mean, I don't think it's in the books. It's just something that we're doing.
Okay, I see. All right. So now, I didn't get a chance to, like I said, I haven't actually read the second draft all the way through, but I did not see it in the first. Is there any way that we can make certain that actually is actually stated in this substitution, so that it's not just something that we kind of do, but it's something that we have to do, that we should be doing?
Are you referring to the idea?
So we're actually looking at the substitution now, because they just added some whereas clause according to Rose. So wanted to know whether or not we can actually amend that so that's no longer just the idea or something that we're trying to get done, but actually something that we need to make certain that we take care of. That it's actually in the.
Sure. So, I mean, Councilwoman Cabrera can speak to her ordinance more directly, but I think more broadly, when we began this process or discussion, really, over the last 3 or 4 years, there was a pretty strong sentiment that having legislation that dealt with multiple housing issues at a time was not the way to go. We heard that from the previous council. We heard that from the public and some of the organizations involved. And I've heard it from some members of the current council.
Yeah, you heard it from me as well, but I'm just saying once they actually started talking about the registrations in this piece, I was just wondering whether or not was this the piece that's going to deal with that, or are we waiting for another, or should we be writing another piece of legislation to actually deal with that?
I think that from the administration standpoint, the hope is that there will be subsequent, and I expect there to be subsequent pieces of housing related legislation that deal with not just the topic you're talking about, which is how and when and why inspections take place, but the funding related to some of these programs. I think there's, under the umbrella of housing, there are many different policy issues that I think are going to hopefully take the form of legislation in the near future. I think some of them may already be up for first and second at the next council meeting. So there's certainly, I think that the approach that we heard from you and others was we should be dealing with these issues, but we should be dealing them one at a time. So I would expect in the near future there to be legislation that touches that exact issue, which is how do we do our inspections and how are they triaged?
If I may answer, and Commissioner Starkey can also add to this. So my understanding right now is that when a property registers for the first time, there has to be a pre-rental inspection. Not necessarily every time that somebody moves in, right, but that property is already registered. That landlord, that property owner already has a history and a record with the city of Wilmington. And as you mentioned, there's further legislation that we can work together with Councilwoman McCoy and Councilwoman Darby, because I know these things are your passion. We want to make sure that when somebody enters into a home, that the home is already safe when it's being rented. And I will tell you that as of today, I had a very, very engaging and thoughtful discussion with Jeff Sheraton of the Landlord Group. And he made an excellent suggestion on how we actually can handle the pre-rental inspections independently of the city inspectors. So that is a conversation that we're going to have to see if that's a possibility that we can do that, because it would speed up the process. The issue with having every rental, especially when you rent the same property multiple times in 1 year to get a pre-rental inspection, it's cost prohibitive and manpower prohibitive. But when they first register that property, they are required to have a pre-rental inspection for the first time.
If I can make one correction.
And yeah, Commissioner, if I'm incorrect or bad information, please correct me.
Right, that's it. I mean, actually make a correction on, we don't do pre-rental, we do rental inspections. Right. In most cases, a lot of them are already occupied, so they're not empty to do pre-rentals. So we do rental inspections as opposed to pre-rentals.
Thank you. Thank you for correcting, making that correction, Commissioner. Well, that was all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman McCoy. At this point, is there any other council member that might have a question before we turn it over to the public? Okay, not seeing any hands raised. I will say that now we're going to go into the public comment period. And again, just to remind you that you have 3 minutes. You can sign up to speak in your chat, and we will call upon you. And you can either ask a question, or if you have a comment speaking to or against the legislation, and we will jot everything down at the end of the public comment period. Then the administration, as well as any of the council members that can answer those questions, will go ahead and answer your questions. We thank you for that part and participating and for being here. Do we have, looking here to see our administrative team with WITN to see if they have the name of who we can start to call for public comment?
Hi, Councilwoman Cabrera. You can just call the names of the people who have their hands up on the attendee side.
Okay, on the attendee side. There we go. All right, so it looks like the first hand that we have up is Mr. Joseph Blake. Welcome, Mr. Joseph Blake. Remember to unmute.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for recognizing me.
Thank you for joining.
My name is Joseph Blake, and I'm Vice President of the Baynard Village Civic Association. And I did have one question, one particular question that we've been meeting and talking about for a couple of months now. It seems as if the community is being inundated by a number of group homes. And my question is, are there any special criteria when it comes to group homes or group settings that rent when it comes to this kind of teeth in the bill to get a particular building fixed up? Because sometimes they have people who are challenged in other ways, physical ways, mental ways. And I'm just curious where this falls in regards to people in group homes that are renting that property, and who rents that property, and is there any kind of special criteria for them when it comes to inspections?
Is that your question? Do you have?
That's one. I'm sorry, I didn't know I was able to get two. And my second question was, the efficacy of the bill seems to be the teeth of the bill. And my question is, since you're going to get more properties inspected, does that mean that more money is going to be put into L&I as resources to hire more inspectors, to do more work, to be able to meet the expected demand of the inspections coming up? And those were my two questions.
That's an excellent question. And as we said, we will answer those questions at the end. But real quickly, I will say that the inspections, if the people are keeping their homes up to code and they go ahead and they fix the code violations, that would not be extra monies coming in, but homes that are now up to code. But we will answer that when we get to that point. Thank you so much for participating. The next person is Stephen Bridget.
Hello. I just wanted to say that it seems to me that if people are doing the right thing, then we have beautiful homes. We have homes that are being maintained, and people can rent them and have nice, comfortable homes. It seems to me that there has to be some sort of enforcement mechanism to take care of those landlords that are not doing the right thing. So I am in support of this bill because I think it will provide an enforcement mechanism that maybe is not there right now, and it will provide for a better city for all of us to live. I am on the condominium council for the 1401 on Pennsylvania Avenue, and this is an issue that we take up frequently in the 1401 with people moving in and out and rentals, and making sure that they are maintaining their rental properties up to code. So I'm 100% behind this bill. but I have no question.
Thank you, Mr. Bridget, for coming forth, and we appreciate your support. Personally believe that it will make a difference and impact our community. And next we have Mr. Jeff Sheraton, which we have been spending a lot of time together on the phone and having some real discussions on how to make sure that this bill is fair to all. Mr. Sheraton, you can speak at this time.
Thanks, Maria. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yep. So my name is Jeff Sheraton. I am a city resident. I'm a landlord, and I'm the president of the Wilmington Housing Providers. I want to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak. I'd also like to specifically thank Councilwoman Cabrera, the administration, and other members of council for allowing the GWHP to provide feedback on this ordinance. Our goal in providing feedback is to help build this ordinance into something that we can support to improve the housing stock in Wilmington. While we appreciate the feedback being incorporated, our feedback being incorporated into this ordinance, we still feel that their ordinance is lacking in a few areas that I think we can all agree need to be addressed moving forward. I want to share 3 areas of improvement that our organization feels are necessary to address. The first is that we feel the enforcement standards should be universal across all properties. The example I like to give when I'm trying to explain this to people is that, if a police officer was to pull you over while driving your car for speeding, the police officer is not going to come up to your car and ask you whether you own the car or whether you lease it to determine how the law should be enforced. The laws are enforced uniformly across all types of owners, and we feel that that should be the same going forward. The goal of this system is not to just improve rental properties. We want to improve all properties. The second point I'd like to bring to your attention is that the proposed ordinance unifies the cost of all violations. So no matter what the violation is, it is the same cost, which to me seems odd. So as a landlord, we have minor violations like squeaky doors or torn screens. And we also have large violations like missing heat or lack of water. It seems to me that it would be reasonable, like in other areas of the law, to make the violation cost reasonable to the severity of the violation. We don't charge the same violation for stealing something as we do for killing someone. So it should really kind of match up in my opinion. And the third most important point, which I think we really need to focus on as a group, is that this ordinance really doesn't provide any method for a hearing to take place before a fine is issued or any reasonable process for a fine to be appealed. A lot of us have been complaining about the courts and that they're slow and they take a long time to do things. And believe me, I get that. As a landlord, I run tenants through court all the time that don't pay their rent, and it is an absolute pain. But we need to remember that the courts exist for a reason. They provide necessary oversight. And as we're building this ordinance to exist within the civil system, I believe that we need to build this oversight into the system. So personally, I would like to see hearings take place before fines are issued and have some sort of reasonable appeal process that perhaps involves the L&I review board, to where if a landlord gets a fine they don't feel is appropriate, they can actually appeal it. As the ordinance stands now, the GWHP cannot support it. Our ask is that you consider these ideas so that we can pass this ordinance to be supported by landlords and the public. We understand the benefit to the city of utilizing a civil process to attack blighted properties. We share the frustration of other property owners and residents experienced with this current system. Our hope is that you will work with us to create a fair system that removes unreasonable constraints of the current criminal system while continuing to preserve property owners' rights to due process and fairness. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sheraton, for your words. And as we had discussed today, that we will be looking at some future amendments. But as of today, the changes that we presented earlier were amendments and ideas that the greater Wilmington Housing Partnerships put forth. And we thank you for your engagement and involvement. At this point, we have Kathleen, who is going to speak next. Kathleen, are you with us? Kathleen, you're next to speak. Do you need to unmute? Okay, we may have lost Kathleen, so let's move over to David, and then we can.
Hello, this is Kathleen.
Okay, great,
Hi.
great.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute and it kept saying the host muted me. So, my name is Kathleen Patterson. I live in the 2nd District of Wilmington. I am a homeowner, and there are rental properties scattered throughout my neighborhood, and I also see the greater part of the city and my walks about the city. I support this legislation. I think that it's important to get these issues addressed in a timely fashion. And from what I see and what I've heard, I believe this legislation is a step in the right direction. And I've listened to Mr. Safran and others talk about future legislation coming that will address some of the other issues people have. I am all for improving the housing stock and the condition of homes in Wilmington. And I think this piece is a step in the right direction, and I'd like to see it move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. At this time, we have David. David, are you with us?
Yes, hi. This is Warren and David of Second District. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
We hear you.
Thank you. Sorry. Yes. Hi. We just wanted to say thank you very much for explaining everything. I really appreciate all the questions and how you are explaining different aspects of the amendments to the law. I want you to know that we are landlords ourselves. We live in the Second District. We see gross violation from landlords. I know that everybody has different definitions of slumlords, but we see people who have abused, the code violations. And also we are very concerned about vacant properties and people, like we have vacant properties in our neighborhood. There's trash, there's people not taking care of them. And there is a significant amount of abusing the court system. So anyway, we believe that this, we are full support of this, these new amendments. And I completely appreciate the fact that L&I's hands can be tied and have to get caught up in the court system. So I believe that the city really needs to really take ownership and pride. We are landlords. We also live near our properties. We take tremendous pride in our neighborhood, and we're very active in the Baynard Neighborhood Association. And as landlords, we fully support this. So thank you very much.
Thank you, David, for your comments. At this point, we are going with Ernesta Corset. Ernesta Corset.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, loud and clear.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. I had two questions. First is, will there be resources presented to the homeowners or the landlords that are receiving these specific issues or ordinances when they come and you give them an actual opportunity to see what is wrong? Are you providing any resources on that same said page to let them know where they could get help if they needed it? And also my second question was, are the fines going to a generalized pot? And if so, why not redirect those fines to help with those said repairs? And how is this going to ensure that it gets fixed simply because we are making the system faster? And that is all I have. Thank you, Councilwoman.
Thank you for those comments, and we will answer that at the end of the public comment period. Andre Harris, you're next.
Thank you so much for having me on tonight, Councilwoman. As you stated earlier, the beautification of our homes don't just speak to the property value of our homes, but it speaks to the property value of our neighborhood. It makes people want to be a part of a community. With that being said, I stand in support of this bill, that if we hold the property owners accountable for their properties, the rental properties, then it would bring back the beauty to our neighborhoods, which could, in result, cut down on the crime that we're seeing in our neighborhoods, as well as people feeling unwanted or not part of a neighborhood or a community. Thank you guys for having me and for listening in.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Andre Harris. I can't agree with you more. Next is Melanie Trice.
Hi there, my name is Melanie. I am a constituent of the 8th District. First, I want to say that I think it's very important for the public to see this in its amended state before it's voted on. And second, if I understand correctly, the fines collected would go into a general fund. And I really think because of the punitive nature of this bill, it'd be great to see these fines go to supporting the neighborhoods in a positive way, like a housing program or other resources. Yeah, and so as of now, I'm not supportive of the bill in its current state, but I hope you consider more amendments to it, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Miss Melanie. And next we have Renee Sproul. Miss Renee Sproul.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I am a member of the Greater Wilmington Housing Providers, landlord in the city. And I've reviewed the amendment, and I really appreciate Councilwoman Cabrera for taking into account some of our feedback and including that. One concern that I had that I did not see included in the amendment was something that Councilman Spadola brought up in terms of how could this impact the good landlords. And I think it's important to point this out. One of the ways that I see this impacting us impacting landlords in general, I think that it's a great idea to have the amnesty period and to do the outreach campaign to get landlords to register. But I would like to see an amendment to this bill that puts a warning period in even after the amnesty period is over. And the reason why I say that is because as a licensed real estate agent as well, I see when properties transfer ownership where there's already a tenant in place. And the way the current ordinance is written, L&I could issue a fine to a landlord for $500 immediately for not having a business license. There needs to be some grace period that allow people to register for business licenses before they're issued. In regards to current landlords, I've talked to some colleagues, including myself. I haven't seen an actual LON in a long time, probably since the early 2000s, have I actually seen an actual LON issued. And I believe that there's several landlords who are actually registered landlords who currently do not have an LON. Before landlords start getting fined for not having LONs for something that's outside of their control, I think that once again, there needs to be a warning period, an amnesty period to say, hey, look, we don't see an LON on file for you. You have 30 days to get it from L&I, or for L&I to at least issue LONs to make sure that every registered landlord has one before they start enforcing fines upon them for something that landlords have no control over. That is a great concern, and I hope that that gets addressed, because if it does not, it's very unfair. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee, for those comments. And next we have Mr. Richard Gessner. Richard, are you with us? Unmute. You're muted. We need you to unmute. Sometimes it's hard to find that button. Okay, you're unmuted, Mr. Gessner.
Thank you, Councilwoman. My name is Richard Gessner. I'm a resident of the 8th District, and I own rental property in the 4th District. I'm the volunteer chairman of the Wilmington Neighborhood Conservancy Land Bank. Also serve as chairman of the Sacred Heart Housing, which is the affordable housing arm of Ministry of Caring. I've been past chair at both Habitat for Humanity and Interfaith Community Housing. I'm also a landlord. I own apartments with my partners on Market Street in downtown Wilmington. I strongly support this legislation. Moving from the criminal to the civil courts, I think, is a great first step. This legislation won't solve many of Wilmington's housing issues, but again, I think it's a great way to get started, and a great way to get started this year, because affordable housing has become more and more an issue as we come out of COVID. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gessner, for those comments. Next, we have Wilmington Democrats.
Hi, this is Cassandra Marshall. I'm sorry that I wasn't appropriately listed here, but this is Cassandra Marshall, and I am the president of the Quaker Hill Neighborhood Association and a homeowner here in the 5th District. I just want to speak in support of this bill. As Mr. Starkey can definitely testify, we have been really engaged here with trying to get some of our landlords to observe some better behavior in terms of providing healthier and more secure and up to code housing here. And it's really difficult, to have a welcoming neighborhood when some of our larger property owners are not in the business of keeping up their houses and are not in the business of making sure that their tenants are safe and secure in these buildings. I am very impressed by the fact that, that this legislation is working very hard at making sure that tenants are very fairly taken care of, that their issues are dealt with quickly. We are talking about people here, and we are talking about people who should not have to live with bad housing for 8 months to a year in order to get a court hearing that will let them get something fixed if it does get fixed. And too often here, we don't see those fixes. So I'm definitely in support of this bill, and on behalf of my neighborhood association, definitely would ask all of the council members on this committee to please vote your support for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cassandra Marshall. We really appreciate your words and your support. And now we have Alvin. Alvin, you need to unmute.
Yes.
There you go.
Hi, my name is Alvin Hughes, and I live in the Trinity vicinity, which is the 4th Councilman District. I'm also the Vice President of the Trinity Vicinity Neighborhood Association. And thank you for having me, and really calling in to just lend my support for this amendment to the legislation. I was contacted by former council person Bud Friel when this was a different name to the legislation. I supported it then. This is somewhat of a so-called watered down version of what the legislation was before, but I understand this is a great first step. And the reason I say that is because it's going to improve the quality of the tenants, their lifestyle, because you have the inspections. Also, it's going to stabilize the community with having some quality property there. And then those property owners, such as myself, that's going to add to the value of our property once those rental properties are taken care of. So I'm in full support of this current legislation. Look forward to other amendments that we can address some of the homeowners and homeowner occupancy legislation that will cover the vacant properties as well. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for speaking, Mr. Alvin. And now we have Dr. Tracy McNair. Unmute.
Okay, how are you?
Fine.
Thank you, City Council, for allowing me to speak, giving honor to you. I am in favor of this legislation. I think it is based on accountability and responsibility, as well as social responsibility. So I am in favor of it. I'm in the 5th district, homeowner, and anything that's positive for a better quality of life is what I'm in favor for the community. Thank you.
Thank you for your support. And next we have David Stitzma Sherman. I hope I said that correctly. David Stitzma Sherman. You can unmute.
Hi, Councilwoman. This is actually David and Jeffrey Stitzma Sherman.
Okay. Hi.
We're on the committee of the 8th Ward. We've seen houses depleted and people in squalor. These landlords need to be taking care of their property so these people can live comfortable in their rented homes, to make sure that the tenants also have a way of living their life in their own rented property. And also seeing how beautiful the city is and how much it could grow with these landlords being held responsible. So we both support this legislation.
We thank you for your support. We definitely need that, and I do agree with you.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much. And next we have Rebecca Cotto. Rebecca Cotto.
Hi, thank you. I actually work in the community service building, and I just wanted, oh, thank you, Chairwoman, for recognizing me. I just wanted to, I understand that you guys are going to be talking to the H.O.M.E.S campaign again, or we're going to be hearing from them later. I just want to share my support for their amendments. I know that you made some amendments today. And the plan that they have was created by the community for the community. And I know there's a lot of community members on here today. I don't mean to discount those community members, but I think I'm referring to community members that don't often have a voice, but live in those neighborhoods. And so we definitely want to hold the landlords responsible. That's not it. We just want to make sure that people don't suffer in the meantime, and not have a place to live. So that's all I have to say. And thank you for the time.
You're welcome, and thank you for all the work that you are doing in conjunction with the H.O.M.E.S project. And now we have Tony Sierzaga. Sure, I don't know how you say that, but Tony Sierzaga.
Thank you, Council. My name's Tony Sierzaga, and I'm a staff attorney with Community Legal Aid Society's Housing Unit, and I'm the co-chair of the Delaware Continuum of Care's Advocacy and Policy Committee. And I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to provide public comment. Classy and the COC are dedicated to fighting for housing justice for all Delawareans, and we strongly support the H.O.M.E.S campaign and its proposed amendments to the bill, along with its comprehensive plan to address Wilmington's housing crisis. As currently proposed, this bill just has the potential unintended consequences to displace, harm, and destabilize Wilmington neighborhoods. Too many Wilmington residents are already facing precarious housing situations, and in light of our ongoing public health crisis, we need to find solutions to alleviate our neighbors' problems and not potentially compound them. We've worked with and I've listened to the H.O.M.E.S campaign's issues with the current bill, and agree that they're very real. I think there's a lot of agreement that bad landlords need to be held accountable, and we must do so in a way that provides as much protection as possible against potential tenant displacement. I'm imagining a family who has lost income during COVID and is behind on their rent. If they haven't been able to access assistance and L&I discovers minor issues that the landlord doesn't have the rental income anymore to use to make the repairs on a tight timeline, that landlord may make the decision to get out of business and evict the family living there and leaving the family without housing. Fines should apply to major health and safety code violations that are significantly dangerous to occupants, and vacant properties as well, to avoid this potential problem. Added due process requirements that aim to create opportunity for maximized compliance also allow landlords to get the repairs done on a reasonable timeline and eliminate the potential cost benefit analysis that they would do, and potentially decide to evict an occupant as opposed to making the timely repairs. In addition, we should also consider applying the fine revenue into a housing action plan and a relocation assistance fund that helps supports our neighborhoods. These proposed amendments are important, but our work with the H.O.M.E.S campaign has also shown that we need to consider a comprehensive plan that addresses community stabilization and reduces the harm caused by our lack of affordable housing. We need a system that clearly outlines how to register and operate as a property owner for all properties in Wilmington. We need a housing action program that helps educate and provides legal assistance to all of our neighbors. And we need to end unfair fines and fees and help returning residents who are unfairly penalized for their past actions. The H.O.M.E.S campaign has identified the exact types of comprehensive reforms that we need, and we encourage council to strongly follow this agenda towards achieving housing justice. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Tony, for your comments. And next we have Christian Willauer. Ms. Christian Willauer, you are muted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I just want to thank council and Councilwoman Cabrera. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I wanted to just take the time to talk a little bit to what's being presented, but also what's possible. And so the basic idea behind this, what Councilwoman Cabrera is proposing, is that all we need to get landlords to fix up their properties is to give the city a simple way to give landlords very big fines. I just don't think this is true. I'm not saying that renters shouldn't live in decent houses. Of course they should. I'm saying that what is being proposed isn't going to work. That's why I'm against it. We have already seen this idea at work in the vacant properties registration program. Its idea is that if you charge owners of vacant properties enough, they will fix up their properties. The city has collected almost $8 million from owners of vacant properties over the last 10 years. It hasn't worked. Wilmington has more vacant properties today than when the program started. So that tells me that bigger fines are not enough. I'm not saying let landlords off the hook. Landlords need to be held accountable, but we need to use policies, practices, and punishments that are going to be effective in solving the problem. And that is not this housing bill that Councilwoman Cabrera is proposing, which would allow the city to fine owners of rental properties $250 a week for any code violation not fixed in 30 days. Knowing the age and condition of many homes in Wilmington, including our own, we can imagine that every home has code violations that can't be fixed in 30 days, which is why I and others are advocating that these $250 a week civil fines should be limited to major health and safety code violations, like no heat, not chip paint, and that L&I should be required to meet with the landlord before the fines start to work out reasonable timelines for the work to be done. I've been talking to legislators about these changes, but I haven't yet seen them put into the bill. More than that, I've been coming to meetings talking about this bill or versions of it for several years. It's an idea that has been around for years. And I really think it's an idea that doesn't speak to our times, which is that we are in the middle of a housing crisis. And we have a lot of very vulnerable renters who may not have been able to pay their rent before the crisis and may have lost their jobs or lost income with the pandemic. We may have landlords that aren't getting rent. Instead of talking about this bill, I wish that City Council would look at the policy recommendations that the H.O.M.E.S campaign has put together in collaboration with homeowners, renters, the homeless, and returning citizens. And I just want to say we need to do something different today. We need to think different, and we should think bigger.
20 seconds.
We have a Delawarean in the White House. President Biden has made housing justice and racial equity some of his top priorities. We should too.
Thank you, Christian Willauer. And we now have another person ready to speak, and that is Tiffany. Miss Tiffany. Oh, Miss Tiffany. Okay, she went down the line. We have Amy Loader. Amy, you need to unmute.
Hi, my hand's not raised.
Okay. Tiffany? Oh, she's on an older version of Zoom, it says here.
Yeah, stand by.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you, Tiffany.
Okay, sorry about that. I was trying to unmute. I just want to thank everybody. I don't want to take up too much of your time.
Just be a little louder so we can all hear you. I know you have something important to say.
Okay, so I wanted to tell everybody why I'm in favor of the housing reform. 260 days ago, my daughter passed away at 634 West 4th Street. I complained several times to my landlord about the persistent conditions of the home. And I even followed steps I was supposed to, yet my baby passed away. I want to tell you about her and what was taken away from me and why the housing reform we have now isn't working. She should have been in her 5th grade year this year where she's not. She's sitting next to me in a
Tiffany, I lost your voice on there, and I know you're saying something important and you're breaking in and out.
Oh, can you hear me any better?
Yeah, I can hear you better now. If you just maybe stay still and stay in that place spot, we can hear you.
Okay.
You said she should have been in 5th grade now, and after that,
Yeah,
you
she
kind
should have been in 5th grade with her twin brother, but she's not. She's sitting in an urn next to me. She was a student body secretary for her school. She was extremely bright. She had honor grades. She was a pillar like for her classmates, and she was a light in our family. That light is gone now. We would have had better housing reform, and maybe if my landlord would have been held accountable or somebody would have stepped in, I still could have had my baby with me. Her death was totally preventable. So I'm totally in favor of the reform, because us citizens of the city, we deserve better. We want stable housing. We want to be able to breathe. Even if we have a pre-existing health condition, we want to be able to breathe freely and not, well, whether there's black mold there to kill us or not. Somebody like has to really do something. I want to thank everybody for listening to me, and I appreciate you, Councilwoman Cabrera, for inviting me to speak this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tiffany. And all I can say again, we're sorry for your loss. She lost her daughter May 24th of last year. She lived in a home with black mold. She contacted the landlords. She did everything that she needed to do. She contacted L&I, but because of the criminal process taking so long and the loopholes that her landlord did not fix the problem, maybe her daughter would be alive now if that process had been shorter. So thank you for sharing your pain, your emotional state that you're still in. It's been less than a year since she lost her baby, and now she is in search of a home, hopefully a safe home, while she is in transitional housing. They literally condemned the house, and she wasn't even allowed to take her belongings with her. That's how bad that property was, but yet it was registered to rent in the city of Wilmington. The next person would be Jerry Velasquez. Unmute, Jerry.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Loud and clear. Wow.
Very good. Guys, Councilperson Cabrera, thank you very much for taking my question. I've been listening to all of this dialogue, and also did take the time to read the draft of what was here. So I would like to say a couple of things, which is this. I think that in the beginning, when this legislation was first floated a couple of years ago, I would be less than frank if I didn't say that I was not in full support of it, as I thought it was trying to address too many issues in a very weak way. In looking at this legislation, I've heard a lot of different comments about how people are characterizing it. So I would like to say this, that I think it represents phased legislation as opposed to watered down legislation, because I think we can all agree on one thing. They're trying to fix and address something as complex and as fluid as housing issues is not an easy task, and it is not something that can be successfully all rolled up into one piece of legislation. So I give credit to the fact that we are trying to attack this problem in a phased approach, taking one step at a time, and thus I am in full support of it. I think it's worth noting that this is a legislation that is pro-tenant. I think that's something that's getting lost here in the translation. While I can understand the sentiments of organized landlords, the fact of the matter is that there's no such thing as organized tenants, and thus they don't have the same voice that landlords do. I've heard everything from how enforcement is not equitable, but as I think someone said earlier, that when a policeman stops you, he should give you the same fine. The fact of the matter, and it doesn't matter whether you own the car or you're the driver of the car, but the fact of the matter is that if your car gets caught by a speed trap or gets caught by a red light camera, the fact that it's documented goes to the owner of the vehicle. I think that this is somewhat in line with what this legislation is doing. I think also that if we all continue to wait for the perfect piece of legislation, nothing is going to happen, and we are all going to continue to be stuck in a waiting game. In summary, I'd like to say this. I am a homeowner. I think that by virtue of being a homeowner, it makes me very conscious of investing and taking care of my property. Landlords that are quote unquote living in the dark need to come out. And I'm glad to see that this legislation is trying to address that. I think landlords that are doing the right thing have nothing to worry about in terms of what this legislation is bringing forth, and thus should be in full support as much as I am. Thank you very much for hearing me out.
Thank you, Mr. Velasquez. And next we have Brian O'Neill.
All right, there you go. Thank you for having me. I had just a few comments and a few questions. I'd like to go with the questions first, if they can be answered later. The first one is more for the attorneys, and I believe Rose Tassoni is familiar with the case Dowd versus Newcastle County regarding due process. There was a case out in Newcastle County that that an owner was fined and he was denied his due process. The end result was a reversal of instant tickets. Even though that may not directly apply here, you may want to consider that case in providing for some appeal process. This ordinance it is selective enforcement against landlords versus homeowners. Landlords are going to be treated differently than homeowners. Again, I'm just pointing out some issues with the bill as it's written that could be tightened up. And more an administrative question for Commissioner Starkey. Currently, with violations, there seems to be no response back from L&I when violations are cleared. I've recently had a few violations that I got cleared, and I never got anything back, computer printout saying, yeah, you're good to go, you're clear. So that's still kind of lingering over my head, and I'm just wondering when the computer system will be upgraded to be able to account for that. As far as some comments, the chair had started out making a comment that don't worry, landlords aren't selling. We had this conversation the other night that, yeah, there is an exodus happening right now with landlords. People are selling off in bulk properties. Right now I know of a couple hundred properties that are on the market under contract to be sold. And I think it's the city's position. These are proven landlords that are responsible. I think the city should figure out a way to get these landlords to reinvest back in the city. They're the ones that you want. Plus, the city can capitalize on double transfer tax, which could turn into a couple $100,000. As far as echoing something that Christian Wilhauer commented on H.O.M.E.S campaign, if this is passed and there's violations and fines given, some of the costs of these fixing the violations will be passed on to the tenants. There could be some discretionary fines. Violations like loose doorknobs, torn carpeting that needs to be replaced that may be able to stay until a tenant decides to move. It's not life-threatening, but if we're required to replace it, we're going to have to back charge the tenants. And that's just it's not a threat. It's just a matter of sound business practices, and that will put pressure back on the tenants, people who most likely won't be able to afford them. As a future discussion, the city may think about providing some type of tenant education. We have, if I can just grant another 10 seconds, there's mandatory landlord training that's been discussed for years. Perhaps some voluntary tenant education classes that will mimic what landlords are required. Section 8, I believe, gives our tenants some basic education. I think it's something that the city should think about. The unfortunate person that lost her child last year, my heart goes out. I have two houses right next door, and if she were educated properly, she might have known how to combat. Thank you, and I'm sorry for the 37 seconds.
Thank you, Brian, for bringing that to our attention. And of course, we look forward to working hand in hand with you on these issues and to answering your questions. Next, we have Christine Kirkland. Christine Kirkland.
Good afternoon. Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, Councilwoman Cabrera, Commissioner Starkey, and all the rest of the council members, thank you for having this open dialogue. I support this bill because it is at least a beginning. I have lived in the city of Wilmington for 20 years. I came here from Philadelphia. I purchased a house over in Village Eastlake in 2005. I paid that house off completely in 2014. I saw a beautiful home over here on the east side. I purchased that home and renovated it. I love my home. Now the bigger issue is the homeowners that are being neglectful, and I don't understand why. When did the criminals? Right.
Christine, in and out.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe because okay, here in the historic East Side, and does it reflect the historic East Side? No. It's a horrible, horrible area where all day and all night, all kind of activity is allowed to go on. But at least this is a start. I've been on several committees and steering committees and seen all these different laws enacted. But Jeff, you're gonna have a heck of a job, seeing this thing through, because I heard about education for the tenants. I heard about education for the landlords. And then 7,000 rental properties, that's a lot of people. And you don't have nearly that kind of manpower. But I am in support of the bill. And together, even if it's a chip by chip, we'll get things done. It's taken time, and we've had this conversation year after year after year. And Commissioner, I thank you for the help that you give me every year with this house next door. I thank you so much. And I support the bill. That's it. Thank you.
Christine, thank you for your comments. Thank you for your support. And we look forward to working with you as we continue to address issues of housing reform in the city of Wilmington. This is just one step. And certainly it's a step that if it needs to be improved upon, we will. But this is just one of many to address what some have said, that some property owners are also in violation. But because when the bill included property owners, people were not happy with it that way. We just had to separate it. So looking at additional legislation and additional solutions is something that we plan to do, and we hope to count on you as a partner. Next, we have Lawrence Smith. Unmute your mic. Lawrence, are you with us?
There it is.
There it is.
Yes. My name is Larry Smith, and I.
If you're on two devices, you have to turn one of them off. Otherwise,
Yeah, I do have two devices.
Yeah. Turn the phone or the computer, one or the other. Don't be trying to double dip in here.
Okay. This is. I can't turn off the damn phone.
Okay, Larry. I think that we're all learning how to deal with these new technologies that allows us to stay connected and still conduct business. And I think it's more inclusive too, because people who can make those meetings physically get to participate in person, even if we're challenged by the technology. Are you ready now?
It still won't close up.
If you can close the program or just turn the phone off altogether.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Okay. If you need another minute, I can go to the next person.
Yeah, go there and do that, and let me wait.
Okay. All right, then we'll bring you back. We're going to go to Sarah Ryan of the Housing Alliance of Delaware.
Where the fuck is the thing?
Hi, good evening. My name's Sarah Ryan. I'm the policy director at Housing Alliance.
Okay, I'm sorry, Sarah. Unmute, please. There you
Sure.
go.
Did you hear me at all?
You started to say Sarah with the Housing Alliance. I thought I was muting Larry, but I ended up muting you.
Oh, okay. No
Sorry.
problem. So my name is Sarah Ryan. I'm the policy director at Housing Alliance Delaware. And Housing Alliance Delaware is a statewide nonprofit whose mission is to serve Delawareans by advancing housing opportunities, ending homelessness, and promoting vibrant communities. First, I want to thank this committee for taking the time to consider the important issues of safe and affordable housing. I know that you're working to ensure that Wilmington has healthy communities, and I thank you so much for your critical work. Second, I want to highlight that the COVID crisis has demonstrated that safe, affordable housing is a universal need. The health effects of COVID have devastated low and moderate income families and communities, and these communities have faced a higher incidence of illness. They've struggled to maintain stable housing, employment, access to food, schooling, and childcare. We're here to testify tonight because we feel that any legislation that puts additional barriers into place for renters in Wilmington or makes it more difficult to remain stably housed is problematic. The work of the H.O.M.E.S campaign is trying to mitigate the impact of the crisis on the residents of Wilmington. The H.O.M.E.S campaign understands the devastation that can be caused by displacement of tenants or barriers to housing. And the Housing Alliance Delaware stands with the H.O.M.E.S campaign in their amendments. We commend the H.O.M.E.S campaign for giving a voice to the community. However, we also commend this committee that they are not ignoring a current housing crisis. They're preparing for the future. And we know that you will serve our community by passing thoughtful legislation. However, we caution that you consider legislation only if it increases housing stability and doesn't put anyone in danger of homelessness. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my comments this evening.
Thank you very much. And yes, all of that will be taken into consideration. Lawrence, are you ready to speak? Larry Smith, are you ready? You have to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Again, my name is Larry Smith. I live at 309 West 22nd Street, and I've lived in the 2nd Councilman District since 1962 to now, present. That's 59 years. I'm here today to support the legislation which enables LLI to enforce the housing code on rental properties through civil systems versus the current criminal system. 2, landlords must fix the code violations at their properties with a reasonable period or face fines that will be assessed more rapidly than under the current system. The third item is tenants will no longer have to wait as much as 12 months for landlords to fix housing violations. And in closing, the revised ordinance creates needed pressure on landlords to fix property code violations. And I support this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry, for those comments. And next we have Wesley Smith, Jr. Wesley Smith, make sure you unmute your button.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Thank you.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you very much, Councilwoman Cabrera. How are you this evening?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
All right. I'll make it brief. I am a homeowner and a landlord here in the city of Wilmington. And I just wanted to be able to say that I am in full support of this legislation. We have to remember that at the end of the day, I get everybody's concerns about what the cost that will be incurred in terms of fixing up your property. But we have to remember that we profit off of these people. We profit off of our tenants. And as a result of being able to profit, we need to make sure that they have the best living environment and the best living conditions possible. So for anybody who does not want to rise to the task, and I'll be very frank, sell your property and leave. Because at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we offer the best services for all of our tenants. We should know better. And the city, and not only just the city, but we should hold ourselves to the highest standards if we want our city to be a model city. So that's all I have to say. But at the end of the day, people need to understand that we do make a profit. And if there's something that's wrong, something that needs to be fixed, it is our job, it is our duty. We are supposed to fix it. And that's the end of that. And I know there's some people that are sitting around and may even say that, hey, you're kind of a neophyte in this game. But at the end of the day, for our tenants, when they ask us if there's something wrong with their property, we investigate and we fix it. No questions asked. They don't need to wait 2 and 3 weeks. There shouldn't be a whole bunch of legislation. You go in and you fix it. It's just that simple. Because if this was $1 million, or if this was if this was a riverfront property or whatever, this would not even be this would be a no-brainer. So when it comes to our tenants and I'll be very clear, in our Black and brown communities, we owe better. We need to do better for them. So that's all I want to say.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, speaking to that, and you hit the nail on the head. In other communities, these issues seem to be handled rather quickly, but it's in our Black and brown communities where people are living in poverty that people tend to look the other way and figure they don't have a recourse, so let's just ignore and let them continue to live in these housings that we don't bring up to code. So with that said, we would like to have Chris is next to speak. Chris? We have Chris with a K-R-I-S.
Yep.
Okay.
Hi, thank you, Chairwoman. I'm Chris Kelly. I am from the 2nd District. I am not in support of this bill. I know we've actually had a few conversations about that for many different reasons, but mainly because the tenants are not protected. And the response continually has been, landlord tenant code, tenant is protected through the law, but we've even heard from other landlords here tonight, the cost of these fines are going to be passed down to the tenants. So in the long run, the tenant is not protected in this ordinance. They're just not. Especially during a pandemic, probably not the best timing. It's just that the bill's messy. This bill is messy. For so many reasons, it's messy. I want to send my condolences to Tiffany. It's outrageous that this happened to you. I am so sorry for the loss of your child. It's criminal negligence. It's negligent homicide on the part of your landlord, and currently under Chapter 34, your landlord would be held accountable under negligent homicide in a criminal fashion, and that's how this needs to go. That was a criminal action. He should be punished as such. I don't think that a fine, ahead of time would have stopped it from getting to that point. Unfortunately, what you tend to see is fines hurt the people that followed the rules. Somebody that's not following the rules in the first place is going to be fined and laugh because they don't care. They don't care to follow the rules. They're not going to care to pay a fine. You've had other landlords on here that have spoken about the mass exodus happening in the city, and that is true. To say they're not going to sell is not right. Even if they don't sell, we are talking about slumlords. We are talking about poor landlords in the first place. They will just abandon their property and leave it vacant. There's so many holes in this bill, and they all need to be examined and filled in before it should even be brought to this point. That's all that I have to say. And thank you for the time.
Thank you for your comments. And next we have Chris Vanderslice.
Hi, how you doing? My name's Chris Vanderslice, and I live in the city of Wilmington. I'm also a landlord in the city and a member of GWHP. I really appreciate all the work the city council is doing on this. and taking the opportunity to listen to public comment. There's a lot of really good information, being discussed tonight. And I think we all can agree that everyone involved and everyone in the city wants to see a better housing stock, and that truly is the goal here, is to make a better housing stock. And there's a whole lot of ways to do that. Unfortunately, I don't think this bill is one that addresses it. One of my biggest concerns with it is that it really takes a due process out of these fines and these violations. So, for instance, if a landlord receives a fine, there's no clear-cut way for an appeal or a hearing. The courts are simply taken out of the process. And as I can appreciate that would be nice, to take the court out of a process. If a tenant is not paying rent, I can't just tell them to leave, and rightfully so, because there may be a reason that they're not paying rent. If the landlord's not doing their job, if the landlord's not providing essential services, and they decide not to pay the rent, you can go to court and they have their time to tell their side of the story. With the way this bill is written, landlords don't have the opportunity to tell their side of the story. And if landlords are doing what they're supposed to be doing, they won't get a fine. However, the bill does it gives opportunity for selective enforcement. So if there is a rogue inspector out there, or someone that if there's a landlord or a landlord group that someone wants to target, this gives them the opportunity for that, and without a clear-cut process for an appeal or a hearing, that it could be abused. And that's why we have a court system, is to prevent abuse and to give people the opportunity to tell their side of the story. I do think there's a lot of good merits with this piece of legislation, and I think that with a little bit of work and a little bit of additional feedback, I think it would be good for all concerned. But in the way the bill is written currently, I would have a hard time getting behind it. So I do appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to me.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for commenting. I will let you know that there is due process and there is an appeals in this bill, and it actually gives you 20 days to appeal versus 10, which what it does in the criminal. But I'm going to let the law department and the commissioner answer that. But just wanted to point that out to you. Okay, the next person up is a phone number, 302-981-0966. If you would like to comment. And unmute yourself. Ask to unmute. Do we have the person with the phone number 0966 at the end? Are you on the line?
Chair.
Are you there?
Chairwoman Cabrera.
Are you there? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Can
we
you
can
hear
you. Yes,
me?
we can hear you.
Okay, just wanted to acknowledge that I'm here, and no comment. I have no comment this evening, and I thank you.
Okay. All right, we have Dennison Hatch. Dennison Hatch, you have your hand raised.
Got it. I'm now unmuted.
There you
I'm a member of Nathan Fields District. At this point, I'm the president of the Highlands Community Association, as well as a former president of the Family Promise of Northern Newcastle County, which has been very effective at keeping people from homelessness. I think that this legislation is an excellent first step. I think that I think we have to assume that the inspectors are going to be reasonable about this. I don't think that we can eliminate legislation just because somebody might be able to misuse it. I happen to have a lot of faith in the Jeff Starkey's organization. I think this does. I don't see why It's going to increase the tenants. The tenants are generally locked into a rent payment. So I don't think that the landlord's going to be able to pass these fines on to the tenants. I think the fact that you've got 20 days to appeal is helpful. And I think that this is a good effort to improve the housing stock in Wilmington. So that's my thoughts.
I thank you so much for bringing those comments to the floor. At this time, if there's anyone else that would like to speak, I do not see a hand raised. I see Jeff Sheraton. Jeff, if you want to make another comment, and then we're going to go into council members having final comment.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity for a second comment. I just wanted to provide some clarification from the...
Jeff, we can't hear you. You might have to get a little closer to your mic.
Oh, I apologize. Is that okay?
Yes, better.
I just wanted to provide some clarification as to the appeal process as I understand it in the ordinance. So as written, the appeal process allows you to appeal the issuance of a violation. So when a landlord gets a violation saying, you need to fix X, Y, and Z, you can appeal saying, I don't think that's my responsibility. But the ordinance does not allow for the appeal of an actual fine. So when the fine is issued to the landlord, there's no internal mechanism that I'm aware of for the landlord to appeal that other than just proceeding to court and trying to sue to have that fine overturned, which is really not a reasonable system. So again, I don't think many landlords are actually opposed to this. We just want to make sure that there are protections in place to allow us to have the opportunity to present our case when we feel it is inappropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because as part of our discussion today, the very concern that Jeff has is that we are going to work with the L&I Review Board, which currently, the way that the review board is listed, they have certain duties and powers, and there's others that they do not have. So I have been assured with working with the administration that the L&I Review Board is going to be revamped. That way they can hear the appeals that the landlords will have in terms of the violation or the fine, and they will be given due process in front of the board. We have also extended an invitation to have a member of the Landlord Association to be part of the review board so that they have a seat at the table. That way they can give us their perspective. So with our conversation today, I share with Mr. Sheraton just to give us some time to get that together, and that I will be putting forth an amendment to clarify the appeal process for this legislation. And that amendment will probably be ready before the actual legislation goes into effect on July 1st. And I do want to say that we have been working closely together, and I appreciate all the feedback from the Greater Wilmington Housing Partnerships and its members, as well as the H.O.M.E.S campaign and others that have written in, spoken to the council members, spoken to myself. It has been a lot of work, but there's been work and transparency, and I appreciate you. And you can keep contacting your council members, all 13 of us, with your feedback beyond this meeting. So at this point, not seeing any other hands that would like to give comment, I'm going to turn this over to the administration so that you can now answer. I know we had duplicates of questions, so perhaps you can answer the questions that were asked by the members that participated today, and then we will give council members a last opportunity to address.
Sure. So first off, I want to thank everybody for participating in this conversation tonight and for your comments and for your questions. And we do realize, I know there was a sentiment shared amongst those who support and those who oppose, that this is not a solution to everything. This is a meaningful solution to a particular problem regarding our enforcement process, but it's by no means the only step that we should be taking. And I expect we will see legislation on a variety of housing related issues in the near future. And some of them, frankly, may not be legislative. They may be sort of administrative fixes we can do. Some of them are budgetary, and council and the mayor can confront them as part of our annual budgeting process. Last thing, a broad statement before we get into some of the questions. While this switch does, there was an individual who spoke, and I apologize, I don't remember her name, from the east side as a homeowner. And so I wanted to echo her comments and say that even though this switch from criminal to civil is for rental properties, our hope in part is that it will benefit all of the properties around it by having a more efficient way to encourage landlords to fix their properties. That can only help every property on the block, regardless of who lives there. So from that point, Councilwoman Cabrera, what I'd like to do is I've been taking a lot of notes as we've been going through this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paraphrase the questions for those who asked questions. I know some just made comments, and then I'm going to ask either I'll answer it or Jeff or Rose, depending on sort of the nature of the topic. Does that work? I'll take the silence as a yes, that works. Okay, so the first question came from Mr. Blake, and he asked if there are any particular or special criteria relating to how enforcement of the housing code takes place in group homes. Jeff, can you comment on that? To the extent there's something.
Right, there is nothing, they're not treated any differently. If there's housing code violations, we conduct inspections on those as well. And Rose may be able to speak a little bit about the legality of the group homes and how they are set up.
Rose, I know that is certainly an issue that the city has, at least I've been in some meetings where that's been discussed before regarding, I know the second question directly from Mr. Blake was one raised by a number of people relating to where's the money that is collected through the civil fines going to go. And I think a couple of the council members may have asked that as well in some of the emails that I saw. So as I'm sure the council members know and the public knows, generally speaking, fines collected by the city, they go into the general fund, and then through our annual budgeting process, each of the council members and the mayor as well get to decide how as representatives of the public, how our expenditures take place. Earmarking funds back into particular programs. My understanding, it hasn't been the traditional practice of the city, but that's something that certainly council can discuss if they feel it has merit. The next, I'm just going down the list here, and so I apologize if I miss anybody. I'm going to do my best to make sure that I hit the ones where actual questions were raised. There was a comment that was sort of a part comment, part question. A gentleman, David, I didn't catch your last name, relating to the vacant properties in your neighborhood as well. And again, I wanted to reiterate, there's my hope, and I think the mayor and this council's hope is that we will be able to pursue other pieces of legislation that can more effectively try to move the needle on the presence of those vacants in your community. The next speaker, I think it was Ernest, raised two questions. One of them was, will there be resources for landlords, homeowners to fix their property? So if I can really quickly, I was able to speak to our housing director, real estate and housing director. The city has a number of programs. One is an exterior code violation repair program. And so owner occupants of single family dwellings who meet certain income thresholds can qualify for funds to try to fix the violations that may be found. The home repair loan program similarly deals with certain eligible repairs like heating, roofing, plumbing. I would also say that there are a number of other programs from DSHA, from I believe Habitat for Humanity, Lutheran Community Services, Cornerstone West, that each receive funding from a variety of sources that can be available to folks who may receive violations and are trying to act upon them. Melanie, you asked a similar question relating to where the funds will be going to. Again, the general practice of the city as fees or fines are collected in the various departments is to go into the general fund. But if that's a discussion that may take place in the future, then that certainly can take place. Just give me a moment as I keep going down this list. Jeff, there was a question I believe that Renee had asked regarding LONs. Could you just explain to the group what an LON is and how that exists in the operations of LNI?
Well, the LON term, it means limitation of notification. And essentially what that is the total number of occupants based on your square footage per apartment. I need to research and find out why they're not being issued to property owners. Typically what happens, LONs are issued probably one time, provided the property doesn't change. But I'll have to follow up Renee on that. I can't answer that specifically until I talk to my housing supervisor.
Understood. Thank you, Jeff. I believe Tony made a comment that was sort of a partial comment, partial question regarding the need for broader solutions, some of which have been referenced by the H.O.M.E.S campaign and the amendments they've put forth. I think, as I said before, this is just designed to be an initial piece of legislation that tackles one problem with one solution. It's certainly not the end. And our hope, Tony, is that we can try to address many of the other issues, the broader issues that I think the H.O.M.E.S campaign is raising, and we can have that public policy debate in the coming months. Brian O'Neill asked 2 questions, and one of them I think is a due process question that I can ask Rose to answer. Rose, can you speak just generally to the differences between the current status of our appeals process and what to extent would be different under the future process if this passes?
So currently, when you receive your violation notice, you have the opportunity to appeal, if you want to appeal, to the L&I Review Board. And that is, if I'm not mistaken, 10 business days to appeal. You would have a hearing in front of the board. And at that point, the board would either uphold the appeal, in which case you win, or the board can deny your appeal, in which case you would then be required to take the actions that L&I has required that you take. The difference with this, it's the exact same process. So after the violation notice has been issued, you have the right to appeal if you'd like to the L&I Review Board. Except that you now have 20 calendar days in which to appeal, and the appeal fee that you are required currently to pay, which is non-refundable. This time it is refundable under the ordinance. So if you succeed in your appeal, your $50 would be refunded to you. The outcome is the same. If you win your appeal, then basically, you're not required to do whatever the action is. If you lose, you would be required to do the action. So the appeal process is exactly the same, with the exception of the time in which you have to appeal and the fact that you can get the $50 back.
And thank you, Rose. Jeff, there was a second question that Brian raised that spoke to the fact that when a violation is found, let's say on one of the properties Brian has or had, and he fixes it, and L&I says he fixes it, and then how is he supposed to be notified that it's closed, case closed, he can move on? How does that work?
What's supposed to happen on the violation, there's a column that lists whether it's yes or no, whether it's in compliance. Once that's in total compliance, that violation should be resent back out, indicating that the violation has been corrected. So I'll follow up with Brian in terms of why that's not happening. And we've had some conversations about it the last couple of weeks, so I'm aware of it.
Understood. I'm just give me a moment as I go down this list here. I'm trying to sort of differentiate the comments and the questions. I think there was sort of another one. Jeff.
Well, Brian brought up another issue in terms of Newcastle County's court case, or the case that, but I think it was more towards the instant ticketing that case was. Am I correct, Rose?
Yes, that case is actually irrelevant to this. It dealt with instant tickets, and it dealt with having to pay the actual fine in order to appeal. The district court actually ruled in favor of Newcastle County in that case. It was appealed to the Third Circuit. The Third Circuit actually never ruled on it because the parties resolved the matter. But it really is not relevant to this particular process, because we're not asking you to pay your fine in order for you to appeal, which is what that case was about.
As I go through this list here, I can see that a Sarah Ryan, who, again, a similar one of those questions that sort of had a question, or comments that had a question somewhere embedded in it. You had mentioned that you wanted to ask about whether these would be additional barriers to tenants. You know, the effort, again, the spirit of this legislation is actually quite the opposite. The spirit is to provide L&I with the enforcement tools to actually protect those tenants. We understand that oftentimes many of them may not always have the ability to forcefully represent for themselves, and L&I is designed to be there to try to enforce this minimum habitability code. So we're hoping that this actually will protect tenants. The only clear other question I had was the last one from Jeff Sheridan. Jeff had asked, and I've heard this point raised by Jeff in recent days about, on behalf of his group, why is there an ability, he's asking if, and hopefully I'm getting this correctly, why is there an ability to appeal the violation but not appeal the fine? Rose, can you just speak to the current scope of the L&I Review Board and what they're able to hear or not hear?
I mean, basically, they are able to hear appeals on any order that's been issued by the Department of Licenses and Inspections. The way that the code is, the order is your violation notice that is issued. And I mean, it's at that point, that's your opportunity to appeal. And if the board finds that in fact the violation exists, then you would be required to correct it. And if you don't correct it, then the code provides for a set fine. And of course, as Jeff did point out, Jeff Sheridan, you have the opportunity, if you find that L&I has done something incorrectly in assessing that fine, you always have recourse to the court.
Thanks, Rose. So, and again, Jeff, to the broader point that I think Maria may have shared with you in recent days, you know, we understand that there may be additional reforms needed within the L&I Review Board. And if that's the case, then certainly the administration, and I'm sure Maria or her counterparts on council will be happy to dig in to see whether those reforms in that board's operations are necessary. So Councilwoman Cabrera, those were the only questions I had caught. There was a lot of comments, but I tried to answer or get somebody to answer those questions. Jeff or Rose, if you noted any that I missed, please let me know.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Okay, well, thank you so much to the administration, to you, David Sofrin, Commissioner Starkey, and in our law department, Rosemarie, the council members that are still with us, and the public who took this time to be here with us. At this point, I want to give any closing or final statements to the council members so that we can proceed with the next part of the meeting, the H.O.M.E.S presentation. So any final statements from my council members? Okay, I have Councilman Field.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman Cabrera. And I just want to mention very quickly, I want to thank you and David Sofrin for very thorough preparation in this hearing, and what I've been impressed with, which is really a willingness to engage anyone who has concerns on this bill, and with the serious effort you've been making behind the scenes that people may not have seen just from this hearing. This is a complicated topic, but what you're doing to really bring transparency and really get the facts out there about what this bill entails is very impressive to me. I think this is a good bill. I want to echo the comments of some of the other people that have called in. It's a first start to a series of bills that addresses many housing issues, and I look forward to supporting it, and also to working together with members of the rest of the council to create a series of really good bills that create real improvement for Wilmington in this area. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Councilman Field. Next, I have Councilwoman Oliver, 3rd District.
Yes, I'd like to thank you, Councilwoman, for doing an outstanding job with your research and engaging so many individuals from the community that deal with landlords or realtors or renters. And I just wanted to make one statement, and I'm gonna go, so I don't want to hold you up because I know it's been a long night. But I would like to thank you that this amendment connects with the stabilization Wilmington, that one that is connected to 1 out of 10 neighborhood projects. Basically, this is the strategic plan process that was adopted by Resolution 17-09, which fell under Wilmington City Council 107 session 2017 to 20. This is just many of the growing communities, safe, secure. It was about 10 of them, I remember, that was on that sheet. And I know this was one of them, which was called stabilization or stabilizing Wilmington. So it's just good to see that strategic plan is everybody in the city of Wilmington is still working on it. And thanks a lot for all the people who came out from the 3rd District who spoke tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Oliver. We now like to acknowledge President Trippi Congo.
Yes, thank you, Chairwoman. Again, I want to thank everyone who engaged with us this evening and gave us your feedback. It was really good to hear from those who sat on both sides of this ordinance. But hearing from the H.O.M.E.S organization, can anyone speak to the concern around not accepting all of their amendments?
Well, at this point, Councilman, they're going to make a presentation and they're going to bring forth some of their ideas and suggestions that they have. They've also brought forth amendments. We've had 2 Zoom meetings with them, with the law department and with L&I, with the commissioner, in terms of their amendments. We actually did address each amendment as they brought it to us as to whether it's something we can do, we can put into this particular legislation, or if it's something that would require future legislation or something that would be administrative. So those conversations have taken place, and we are still working with them.
Okay, thank you. I would also like to hear, again, from someone on both sides of the ordinance. There's a concern around possible displacement of residents. So if anyone can kind of work out a scenario where that is a possibility or that isn't a possibility, and if not right now, maybe the H.O.M.E.S organization can include that in their presentation. I'm not sure if anyone from the administration would be able to address that also.
Council President, if I may, one of the things that has been done with what we presented today, I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at it, but because of the conversations, the first conversation that we had with Councilwoman Darby and the law department and the commissioner, the second meeting that we had took place yesterday, which included other members of the H.O.M.E.S organization, but we have added a whereas clause, and it reads, City Council believes the City of Wilmington's enforcement efforts should also include educational outreach with regard to tenant rights and responsibilities and financial assistance for such things at tenant relocation. Whereas City Council believes it's appropriate to address the funding of such educational and financial programs through the budget process. So the administration has committed to creating a fund, and this will be a line item in the budget to set some funds aside, working with the real estate department and any other social organizations that exist, so that if anyone were to be displaced, specifically because of this legislation, or maybe any other issues surrounding housing, that the city would provide that assistance, which goes hands in hand with the suggestions that the H.O.M.E.S organization is making. That if for some reason landlords want to pack up and go, there is a process. You can't evict people without going through the process. But if those residents find themselves where they have nowhere to go and they don't have the funding to relocate, that this fund is being created. And it is included,
thank you.
whereas clause in the legislation.
All right, thank you. I would like to just have more discussion about that offline. Thank you very much.
Okay, great.
All right, thanks.
You're welcome. And now we have Councilman Christopher Johnson from the 7th District.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I have been listening tonight, just kind of taking it all in as I've been involved with this fight for a while. And, I would just like to first commend the administration for the hard work And I can't recall any bill in Wilmington, frankly, any bill in Delaware that has been so much engagement and feedback and amendment. I mean, this has been a comprehensive process. So I can say I definitely, as my residents, support this bill, and it's something that is a long time coming. And I do want to leave everyone with one note. If we really look at the opponents and the folks who call it out, is most of them sit from a position of privilege. It's usually either the landlords or a white person that is not in the city and is not suffering next to the blighted property. And so for that, I just say, we appreciate the engagement from those outsiders, but when you talk to the community, this is what they want. And we're putting the safeguards in place to make sure if there is any negative impact, that we're going to be working with our community to make sure they continue to stay in affordable housing. So it is not an easy solution, as Councilmember Field has said, but it is something in which we have approached from a strategic point of view. So I commend everyone engaged, no matter what side you are on, but we just have to remember who we're speaking for. And the voices tonight made it clear that they support this bill. They frankly have for a long time. So I look forward to supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Chris Johnson. And next I have a Councilwoman Shané Darby from the 2nd District.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Chairman, Councilwoman Cabrera. I have a really bad headache, so I'm going to try to make it through. I've been trying to make it through this whole session. But I do want to say that landlords need to be held accountable. Renters need to have safe, affordable housing. I am a Wilmingtonian, so I was a renter here, so I experienced a lot of I had a lot of negative experiences being a renter, but I am now a homeowner, and I believe housing is a right. However, I am not in support of this legislation in its current state. I have not been able to read the amended legislation, so because it was sent 15 minutes prior to this meeting, so I didn't get a chance to read the amended, so I can't really speak to the amended revised legislation because it was sent at the last minute. And I like to read before I support anything and get community input. And I just want to say, for community people who are able to come here and speak, that is also a privilege. There are a lot of community people who cannot. So I have an organization, I work on the ground with a lot of people who can't make it to these meetings, right? And I speak to them a lot and work with that community as I am from that community. And I just really feel like this legislation, the timing is off. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Tenants are not protected. There's potential for land grabbing and gentrification. So when I first heard that the blight bill was coming back, I got a call. Would you support this? And I'm like, I like to read before I say I'm gonna support anything, right? And one of the first things I did when I got the legislation was rally up the community. So that's why you're seeing community response now. I contacted landlords, organizers, residents about this issue for them to come up with amendments and meet with Chair Councilwoman Cabrera. And quite frankly, the major concerns were not considered. And I believe collaboration with the community on policies like this are needed, not just people who are in civic associations who have the privilege to be able to come to meetings like this. I'm talking about the people without a voice who can't make it to these meetings, who does not have the privilege or the resources or the accessibility to be able to come to these meetings. And that is what the H.O.M.E.S campaign, that's what they do, right? If it wasn't COVID right now, they would be on the streets, like literally talking to people, right? Engaging like homeless people, like that's what we do as organizers, right? We just don't engage the already engaged. We are about engaging the unengaged, right? And getting their voices heard. So prior to this legislation becoming public, there were already 7 co-sponsors on this. So there were already 7 votes. So this was going to go through either way, with or without me being able to rally up community input on this. And I do want to say that there were 2 meetings that were had for us to go over the amendments, and not one amendment was applied. And I do not feel like it was collaborative. I feel like the most that was applied was the whereas clause, which is not a definite, it is a promise. It is a, we can do this if we want to, and, we have to bring it up, and it has to be approved and voted on. It's not something that is guaranteed just because it's in the whereas clause. So I want that to be noted too. And from day one, I was proposing that we make a promise that we're going to allocate funds to help the displaced small landlords. All landlords do not profit off people. We have small landlords. And then we are in the city of Wilmington, where historically redlining has affected our communities, especially Black and brown communities. And then redlining exists today, where if you live in certain zip codes, it's harder for you to get loans as someone else who lives in a different zip code, right? So those things, the programs will help small landlords and the people who would be displaced. And I think it's really important that we don't use fear tactics when we're talking about major issues like this. So in the beginning of this conversation, it was opened up talking about gun violence, and it was kind of offensive as I'm living in the middle of this and been affected by this as someone who actually grew up in Wilmington, and in the midst of this, trying to figure out why we're talking about gun violence and bringing it up, but the city council as a whole has not made any, we barely talk about it. Let's just talk about that. But let's keep going, because I don't want to talk about gun violence tonight. That's another topic. But to use a fear tactic to connect and make a causation that vacant homes causes crime, we can't make those blatant out causations, and it shouldn't have been brought up since we're not even discussing vacant homes. We're talking about rentals, right? And other cities failed at compliance with a fix it or fine approach. When you look at the other cities that did a kind of fix it or fine approach, it actually led to gentrification and displacement of Black and brown people. So the community and I, since the 7 votes already were, 7 sponsors are already on here. When I was reached out to be a sponsor to something that they wanted me to be on, but I need to read first before I do a sponsor to anything. So I guess I'll just be working with the community, with homes, the landlord associations, as I have been doing, and getting them engaged in this, and spending time just trying to get legislation to fix and make sure that renters aren't displaced, small landlords aren't impacted as the result of the possible negative impact from this legislation. And thank you guys for your work. Thank you to all the 2nd District residents who came out and spoke. Thank you to all the other residents who came out and spoke. Thank you to my other council members. And thank you again, everyone.
Thank you. We now have Councilwoman Bregetta from the 5th District.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just first like to say good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I've heard everything that everyone has had to say. And I first like to actually thank Madam Chair for taking the initiative, putting boots on the ground and reaching out to everyone according to the fix it and fine. Everybody's not gonna like everything, but what we have to do is we have to find that medium. So what I'm gonna say, I'm just gonna say this. I'd like to thank all the residents and everyone that for participating and voicing their opinions. We all need to remain active, and we need to tackle the challenges. I'd like to thank the mayor's administration for their careful attention that they're giving to this issue. I want to say let's keep working together to bring about an impactful change. And lastly, let me leave you with this. We have people that say the Black and brown, and they live, they understand how these individuals live. I was a renter at one time. Now I'm a homeowner. However, I've had the opportunity. I didn't just start going into these rental properties to see how they lived. I've been doing this for years, along with my mother. There's been steps you can walk. You're scared to even go up the stairs because you don't know if you're going to fall through. but the renters are terrified to even say anything to the landlords. So people telling me, and I live in the 5th district, and I can walk out my back door and I can tell you now, there's windows broken to properties that's rented. Okay, people have boards up to it where the landlords haven't fixed it, and it's been 2 years. I have so many rental properties around me. Then I have some good landlords that's in my district. But I just want to say this: everyone sent, Miss Tiffany their condolences, but I lived across the yard from her. We've had conversations. We talked about that. So I know her, I know where she's coming from. And she said to me tonight, she said, Councilwoman Fields, this is the first time I've had the opportunity to speak about the loss of my child. I wish that someone would have addressed the issues beforehand, not just right now. She said, I understand where other people are coming from, but look at where I am. I am not just a number. I am a human being who has lost my child. She said, and I am in support of it. And I will do whatever it takes to help you make sure that this legislation goes forward. So I'm just asking everybody tonight just to be mindful that we all can work together. Everything is called accountability. When you point one finger, 3 are coming back at you. So again, I just want to say thank you to the 5th district for those who supporting the legislation. Thank you. Thank you for everybody else from all the other districts. And again, this is a democracy. We must work together for the people and not for the power. We are here for the people. They put us in these seats. So they made it, they said, it's okay for you to sit in that seat because we know that you're going to make the right decision for me. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilwoman Fields, for that. I would like to have a last word before calling a motion. And, for those who don't know me, I just want to make clear that community outreach, I have been working in community outreach for many years. I actually have a business performing community outreach. So this is not my first time presenting legislation. In fact, some pieces of legislation that I presented in my last council session. When I was here, I took up to 2 years to do the research to make sure that it was a solid piece of legislation. Some of it was controversial. Landlords didn't want to have mandatory landlord training, but I met with them. I went to their meetings to discuss this with them, which is where I built those relationships with people like Jeff Sheraton and others. So it was a natural for me to go to them to discuss this with them because they were folks that had brought up some concerns. I and other members contacted constituents, renters, property owners, aside from just the people from the Landlord Association. I appreciate the outreach that was also done with the H.O.M.E.S organization, and they came to the table and they brought some positive feedback and some great ideas that we're going to hear about, that we can still, as City Council, work with them, whether it's part of this legislation or not. There's pieces that can either be worked into it or new legislation that can be drawn. In terms of fear tactics, I don't need to use fear tactics because there's plenty of facts, which I chose not to bring the visual and to show the correlation between the Part 1 crimes in the city of Wilmington that correlate with the neighborhoods. They're the most dilapidated neighborhoods and downtrodden where there are vacants. And I don't want to say renters, but at the end of the day, they are neighborhoods where the renters live with landlords who choose to avoid fixing those properties and bringing their properties up to code. Because where people feel that no one is looking, that they can get away with it, that is where it happens. And the facts and the data speaks for itself. So those are not scare tactics. Those are actually the truth. And if we really want to get to the bottom of crime in the city of Wilmington, we have to look at everything. What happens in our neighborhoods, stabilizing our neighborhoods, the businesses that are in those neighborhoods, education, outreach, and helping people know their rights. And in terms of assets, if you're a landlord and you have a property and that property is of value and there's an asset, I highly doubt that a business person is going to get rid of their asset, let it sit vacant instead of making money over some simple code violations at $250, when in the criminal version of this bill, it actually would go up to $1,000 and they would be fined on a daily basis. So that is also untrue. You know why people are selling properties right now? Because it's a seller's market. And guess what? Those same properties are being bought. People are not selling properties because the city is placing a fine on them. Because where are they going? To the county? Because the county has more restrictive and prohibitive housing code laws than the city. So that is also false. So with that said, I want to make a motion to move substitute number 1 to ordinance number 21-006, an ordinance to amend chapter 34 of the city code to revise certain enforcement provisions and provide civil fines for the owners of rental properties out of this committee and to the full council for a vote on Thursday, February 15th. Do I have a second?
A second.
After the second, on the questions? No questions. All those in favor say A.
Yay.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay.
Nay.
The ayes have it. Thank you. Now we will have a presentations by the H.O.M.E.S campaign, and they will share some of the ideas that they have put together to also complement what we're trying to do and how we can better our neighborhoods and neighborhood stabilization in the city of Wilmington. I welcome the organizers of the H.O.M.E.S campaign. We have Ms. Cheyenne Miller, Dr. Ann Aviles. I believe Ms. Christian Willauer might be with us, and Councilwoman Shané Darby is also part of the organization.
So we're going to share our screen real quick so we can give our presentation, pull our presentation up.
And thank you for your patience as well.
So I just want to say thank you to the committee for allowing the H.O.M.E.S campaign to come and speak. We want to give a presentation about some policies that we think that Wilmington will benefit from as it relates to housing, and just a little bit of information about who the H.O.M.E.S campaign is. So H.O.M.E.S campaign is a campaign that is ran basically by volunteers from across the state, but it includes people in the city of Wilmington. And can we go to the next slide? And we focus on making sure that we are making housing a human right across the state. And so instead of, only wanting to see housing as something that some are access to or housing as a business, we want to ensure that people are able to make housing as a human right. So hopefully what we'll be able to talk a little bit about today is, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. Hopefully we'll talk a little bit about today is who the H.O.M.E.S campaign and what our objectives are. We really care about renters, homeowners, and people who are coming home from prison, and making sure we are ending homelessness. And our goals and objectives have really been about community-driven policies. At the bottom of this slide, you see some pages, or some pictures, excuse me, from a summit that we held about a year ago this month, talking to people from across the city, people who are experiencing homelessness, people who are renters, people who are homeowners, people who had been to prison and come home, and landlords and nonprofits and city council members, all in this group talking about what did they want to see happen in the city of Wilmington. And frankly, during that time, they came up with a number of community-driven policies, and we wanted to make sure that community engagement was a part of the way that we operate as a volunteer organization. And we wanted to make sure that we were focused on solutions and not necessarily, things that weren't necessarily positive. We wanted to come up with a really great comprehensive plan and then bring it to city council as it was broken down into some phases, things that they could take steps on. And our big thing is we don't want to play into the narrative that we see often where we're pitting landlords and property owners and homeowners against tenants and tenants against homeowners. It's just not the way that we want to operate. Everybody deserves a place in the city and everyone is valuable in the city. We also want to ensure that we're working with both city officials and nonprofit organizations to provide housing stability. Next slide, please. So just the big picture, like I said, we got all those people together and came up with this comprehensive plan. And part of that plan includes some revisions to ordinances, policies, and practices. And we wanted to make sure that we're focused on stability, stabilizing our neighborhood, stabilizing our community. We want to protect the most vulnerable residents by ensuring that there is affordable and sufficient safe housing in the city. And we want to make sure that we are actually investing in our neighborhoods. Next slide, please. And so just to talk a little bit about like, how does H.O.M.E.S work? What do you mean when you got all these people in the room? So our idea about how change happens is that we believe that you have to be advocating for policy change. And while it's important to be providing the services that people need to make it through the day and to be living, we know that if we want to make it so that we no longer have to worry about people being homeless or people who are living in substandard housing or living in no housing, that we have to be focused on policy advocacy. We believe that policy advocacy has to happen through community organizing. The people who are the most affected have to be the ones speaking. And so we try our best to live that out. And we also believe that everyone has to be a part of this policy change and this advocacy process. That means renters, people who are unhoused, landlords, homeowners, people coming home from prison, nonprofit service providers, legislators, and advocacy organizations. And our big thing is building from the ground up. Next slide. So just a real quick, we talked about comprehensive housing solutions that were come up with during that summit a year ago. And really what we found was that everyone really was interested in this idea of investment, of instability, and of protection. And so some of the things that they came up with were ideas about making sure that the city was investing in homeowner repair grants and down payment settlement assistance, help people become homeowners, help people stay homeowners. So making sure that we're not kicking people out of their house because they can't afford their water bill. So no more water bill foreclosures. Making sure that there's transparency and accountability across all of these departments that the city runs, including license and inspection, the Department of Real Estate and Housing, some programs and organizations such as the Wilmington Housing Partnership and the Wilmington Land Bank, and allowing for us to make sure that we are looking at vacant properties and getting them registered, rental properties and getting them registered. Protecting tenants was a big one that came up. And obviously it came up tonight as well. And that includes things like right to counsel for evictions, ensuring that there is a minimum arrears before someone can get evicted, making sure we're getting all rental properties licensed and inspected. Next slide, please. Other ideas that came up were making sure that we are using programs and providing housing to end homelessness. And that includes repealing any ordinances that criminalize or fine the unhoused, that are people who are not living in their own home, and making sure that we are providing opportunities for people who are coming home from prison to access public housing. That's a big one for us. So we think about that in the form of, this is a public safety issue, this is a morality issue. If someone has done their time and they're coming home from prison, we should not continue to discriminate against them. We should ensure that they're provided with safe housing, because we know that that's going to make it so they don't recidivate later. Next slide. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Aviles.
Thank you, Cheyenne. So I just want to note, I think we're going to have a couple slides that are not included here that I'll just share. But we wanted to share the context, and I think a couple of folks spoke to this in the earlier conversation in terms of who is impacted by this housing burden. One is to recognize that this is a structural issue, that unfortunately there are not enough available and affordable rental homes that exist for the number of low income renters that actually need them. So there's only 32 rental homes that actually exist for every 100 people that need them. So that's a structural issue. We do not have enough housing stock. We need to work on that. We know that Black and Brown communities bear the brunt of this, with 62% of Latinos that are cost burden, and 60% of Black renters that are cost burden, and 48% of whites. And what we mean by cost burden is that people spend more than 30% of their income on rent. In some cases, unfortunately, it's like 60, 80%. When you're spending that much money paying for your housing, you do not have the income needed for basic items such as electric and water and food and transportation, things that are needed for our day-to-day. We also know from looking at the data that, and the most current data we have, right, is the 2019 point in time count. And based on this data, we know that Black Delawareans experience homelessness at a rate that is 4.3 times higher than white Delawareans. Can't remember who said this, right? But thinking about issues of race, but then also the ways in which people are perceived, right, based on their racial identity. And then finally, we know that while Black Delawareans make up 60% of the prison population, but only 21% of the state population. So we want to make sure that when we're talking about people returning home from prison, that we recognize that the Black population is disproportionately impacted, right? And we know this is historically because of legislation such as, being tough on crime, and the assumption made by many city officials and even local preachers and things of that nature that thought like, well, if we're going to address violence, like 3 strikes and you're out. And unfortunately, what that has resulted in is a school to prison pipeline, right? In the United States being the largest jailer on the face of this earth. And so we want to caution against legislation that seems on the surface like it's doing what it's supposed to. Unfortunately, we've seen not only here in Wilmington, but in other places right across the nation that crime and violence have not gone down because of these tough on crime kind of policies. So I'm not sure if you could go to the next slide, although I may make a little bit of change. Yeah. So because we do not have obviously people speaking with us tonight, but for those of you that are interested, I would highly recommend that you check out our Facebook page, which is H.O.M.E.S Delaware. And on our Facebook page, we do have a recording where we invited Wilmingtonians to come speak about their challenges with housing. So the slide, I'm just going to read this from my own slide here that I have at home. We want to recognize and warn against unintended consequences. We did some of our research after conversations, right, with Councilwoman Cabrera and her staff, and what we found, a couple case studies where one being the city of Detroit, where in February of 2018, the city implemented a plan that required all rentals to pass city inspections, and penalties range from $250 to $1,000 each for the first offense, and they can go anywhere up to $3,500. What the city of Detroit has found is that tickets have not been enough to prompt most people to follow the rules. They implemented this, as I said, in February of 18, and of January of 19, only 11% of registered rentals had taken the required steps needed to receive the clearance to operate. This report also found that landlords were pulling out of Detroit. Another study done by a professor at Johns Hopkins University studied the impact of civil penalties for housing code violations on landlords and tenants in Cleveland. This report is called Regulating Landlords: Unintended Consequences for Poor Tenants. And what they found was that to manage this perceived, I'm reading a direct quote here, precarity, landlords reported measures that undermine tenants' housing security, which included things like excessive screening, hassling, elevated rent amounts, a tendency to evict, and divestment, not investment, which is really what H.O.M.E.S is about, divestment from the lower end of the housing market. And we know that this is a stock that continues to dwindle across many cities. If folks are interested, we are definitely happy to share those reports. So if you go to the next slide, please. So as Shané discussed, this is a comprehensive approach to addressing housing. And I heard this, throughout the conversation this evening. There is not a silver bullet that is going to fix everything. We have to think about, right, a collaborative, comprehensive approach. And so we are presenting this evening on some of the phase 1 of the housing advocacy priorities of H.O.M.E.S to enforce rental property registration and business licensing, enforce vacant property registration, implement a housing action program. We heard some of that this evening. We want to stop fines and fees for people experiencing homelessness, moratorium on water bill foreclosures, and then housing support for returning residents. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So first problem that was identified, and as Cheyenne shared those photos from last year, what we did as part of that launch is we actually broke up the 4 groups of people: homeowners, landlords, homeowners, renters, including landlords, formerly incarcerated folks, and then people that were unhoused. And so we pulled some of the issues that they identified and also the solutions that they proposed. And so the first problem, which we heard this evening, right, that the city doesn't have an accurate count of the number of rental or vacant properties that truly exist. And there is not a fair, straightforward process to hold landlords and property owners accountable. And so we are urging the city to develop an organized, mandated system that clearly outlines how to register and or operate as a landlord or property owner for all properties in Wilmington. So really enforcing what already exists, which is the rental property registration and business license, and then also a vacant property registration. So again, this is not new. This is what is already currently right on the books. Next slide, please. We are big on promoting tenant rights. As we heard this evening, many tenants are not aware of what their rights are. And so because there is not a systematic program in place, right, to inform and educate people about housing, it's hard to, for residents to enforce rights that they don't know they have. There's also not a process to help people avoid going to court over housing issues. The goal is that if we could have like a mediation program, so before, right, tenants and or landlords even hit the courts, they could have some support in order to prevent any kind of legal action from taking place. So we're referring to this as a housing action program, which it sounds like this may be in the works, where the city would collaborate with nonprofits and other organizations to ensure that tenants are aware of their rights. Next slide, please. So ending unfair fines and fees, right? There have been a lot of discussions from unhoused folks, right, who are basically telling us that they are pushed out of the downtown area. They are fined from doing basic things like just being out in public. And so our goal is to stop fees and fines for people that are unhoused, knowing that they don't have any place to be, even if they are residing in a shelter. Many times shelters will ask residents to leave, right, for the day, so they don't have a safe place to be. So we want to stop these fines and fees. And then we also heard from one of our speakers last week that they can be basically evicted from their home because of high water bills. And we've also heard from some owners that there can be foreclosure on homes, again, because of these high water bills. And so if people are already struggling to pay rent or mortgage, it doesn't make sense to us to then penalize them, right? If they have been able to pay their mortgage or their rent because they haven't been able to pay some of their utilities to basically displace them. Next slide, please. So definitely, right, as the previous slide showed, a lot of folks are coming home, right, from prison. And so we want to make sure that they are not further disenfranchised by having barriers for them to access housing. If they have served their time, then they've done the punishment, they should come out and be able to access right housing so that they don't become further destabilized. We have been told that there is a pilot program that is occurring to support folks that are coming home from prison. Two of the gentlemen that we heard from last week who were recently released from prison said they were not made aware of this program. So we're not sure what's happening there. We have reached out to a couple folks to try to see if we could learn more as to why there's not awareness for this pilot program. And we would actually suggest that it become a permanent program so that anyone coming out of prison is able to access affordable housing, also public housing, right? Again, I can't remember. We've heard from so many people this evening, which I really appreciate all of the conversation, but we know that Black and brown communities, right, are over policed, which then puts them into prison. And then they come home to poor communities and they are banned from living with their families because oftentimes they are in public housing. So that's one piece of this. And then also banning the box on housing application. I want to make sure that we're clear, right? We know that there are some offenses or felonies where people have to register. So we are not talking about these severe cases, right? We're talking about folks, again, who have served their time. They should be able to come home and be able to access housing. Next slide, please. Oh, yep, you can go past that one. So I don't know, Cheyenne, I know you have your baby tonight, so I don't know if you want to jump back in, but
yeah, I can.
Go for it.
Yeah, so, you know, like we said, we want to make sure that we are getting members of the community involved, and there are different roles for everyone, but, you know, everyone has an opportunity to get in with the H.O.M.E.S campaign. And one is we really want to invite City Council to work together to create comprehensive policies, ones that will not displace, ones that will not harm, and ones that realize housing is a human right. We are also really excited to have the ability to connect with nonprofit and community-based organizations who are on the ground working with the people who are most in need. We want to ensure that if you are interested in connecting with us, please do so. And then, of course, with residents, you should always you know, be able to speak on this issue with your legislators, and to be able to you know, convene with other members of the public who care about making housing a human right and who care about making our neighborhoods inclusive and fair and clean and safe places to live. And so we also invite you. And so yes, that is generally it. Thank you very much.
And listed here, I'll just say, is our website. So please feel free to check us out there as well.
Anything else, ladies? Anyone else that would like to comment? Any questions that we might have from either the council members at this time? And then we can open any questions to the public. So I see Councilwoman Harley has her hand raised. Councilwoman Harley, I apologize if your hand was raised before we closed out the other session. I did not see it. The last hand I saw if there was Brigitta's.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you. I'll email you what I wanted to share with you.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry.
You're welcome. So my comment basically is to the H.O.M.E.S campaign. I just want to say thank you for sharing your presentation tonight. I had the opportunity to listen to it. I think this may be the third time that I've had the opportunity to hear the information. So I just wanted to say thank you, and that hopefully there will be an opportunity for us to look at some other topics of concern that was shared in your presentation. And I just want to recommend and or suggest that you perhaps speak with some of our state legislators, because the state definitely have more access and funding as it relates to housing, definitely more than the city. And what I've heard through your presentation sounds like the state, how they're aligned may be more suitable. Just a suggestion. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about how we could possibly
work together. And I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. And to clarify, we definitely are talking to state legislators about some statewide policies and are interested in hopefully we'll see an ability for the city council to also have a committee that's focused on talking with the state about legislation as well.
Thank you.
Great. At this time, I would like to call on Councilman Chris Johnson from the 7th District.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman. I just wanted to again commend H.O.M.E.S campaign. I am very impressed by their work and the research they do, because it is a bigger systemic issue, especially regarding incarcerated persons and their families. And I just wanted to see, and I know you guys have a policy tracker, but we have been making, I know, at least efforts in the criminal justice realm. Back in 2019, we actually made loitering not a crime, or at least loitering just on Market Street not a crime. So we took a lot of steps, and we have listened and implemented these policies so that folks would not be harassed by the police. And so we continue to, I think, feed off your ideas and advocacy work by community organizers. So I applaud the effort, and I think going forward, especially regards like vacant housing, we need your ideas. We need your ideas at the table, and and I know Chairwoman Cabrera listens, and so do I. We can't necessarily solve all the problems or take all the recommendations or make every amendment possible, but we're going to be damn sure to try and get most of it right. So again, I applaud the effort, and I look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you, council member. And I think there needs to be some clarity. It sounds like the loitering thing was decriminalized into a civil fine, and that civil fines can still be given to homeless people if they're loitering, or anyone else who's loitering for that matter. Can you clarify if that's the case?
No, so, and I can pull that to the ordinance. It was the end of 2019, so we passed the ordinance. It was actually at the behest of the ACLU working with us to no longer make just panhandling, no longer make panhandling a crime, because under Wilmington Code it was a crime, so we actually took it off. Now, harassment, those things still stay on the books, but panhandling was no longer made a crime. So, we made our city safer and more inclusive for everyone involved. So if they did get a ticket, then that's a problem. And, we need to investigate why they are getting tickets if they're not harassing anyone.
Thank you for that, Councilman Johnson. I also just want to share, I'm sure many of you on this call know, right? Policy and practice aren't always in tandem with one another. And what we've been told from people, within the last year, because I'm hearing what you're saying in terms of time frame, they continue to be harassed and they continue to be discouraged, not lightly, from basically spending time downtown. So I don't know if that's a training issue, but the policy, right, is on the books, but what's happening in practice sounds very much like what was happening pre that policy.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for letting me know that.
Thank you, Councilman Johnson. At this time, we have Councilwoman Yolanda McCoy from the 6th District.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Also, just to piggyback on what you were just stating about the panhandling, the signs, the ones in my area actually have never come down, so I didn't know whether or not we were actually no longer enforcing it either. So just to make you aware. Thank you. I just want to say thank you to the H.O.M.E.S campaign for bringing a presentation. I've actually heard, unfortunately, I had not gotten to the meeting, but I was invited to actually go over, some of the policy ideas in their tracker and what they envisioned for, trying to help with the legislation for this term. And getting that information to us early on, was really, it was great for me. It was a lot of stress from, previous terms of trying to really handle policy as a basic, a novice, and to have people who have understanding bring this information to me was actually great. I was actually believing that we would probably jump on this right away. I was actually stunned a little bit that we already had the housing reform bill prepared and ready to roll out so quickly. So I was really looking forward to really seeing some of those policies actually come to play. So I just want to say thank you, because I believe that we still be looking at it. We've heard a lot of great things about what's actually coming down the pipeline, and we hope that we'll be able to work together. I am still part of this committee, and I look forward to hearing from you guys again. So thank you again for that presentation.
Thank you.
We have President Congo who would like to speak at this time. Unmute, Mr. President Congo.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just for my my clarity, it seems like the H.O.M.E.S organization was talking about loitering, but our legislation that we're talking about was panhandling. So it seems like we might be talking about two different things. I think their concern was homeless people being targeted for loitering. I don't think that we addressed that on City Council, unless I'm mistaken. Also, I do want to again just thank them for the information, and I'm still confused. I don't understand what was our concern with accepting their amendments. If we can't speak to that right now. It just seems like we're very thankful for them for coming and sharing and for all of their input, but we didn't accept their amendments. So I'm just trying to figure out which of their amendments brought us angst or more concern for us being able to incorporate all of their amendments in the legislation. Thank you.
Thank you to President Congo. I will speak to that. There are some of the concerns that they brought up that are already listed in the legislation. There was a concern about people not being given a violation without being given time to really fix it, that they're going to get hit with a fine without having ample time. And that was discussed at length, that anyone who cannot fix the property within 30 days, that they would be given additional time. All they need to do is contact the Department of L&I, speak to the inspector, and it was made very clear, Commissioner Starkey spoke to this, that time would be given. The city's not running around giving folks fines without giving them the notice. They get a notice, they get 30 days. They're going to get a second notice stating that you did not fix the property within that time, which will probably turn out to be more like 45 days before the inspector comes back. And at the time that they would be given a violation, they would also get a notification. So it's not like the landlords are getting fines without being given due process. That was one of the concerns that they had, and that is addressed in the legislation. Some of the points that they brought forth are items that we can look at legislation around that, because we know that this legislation took out the vacant properties and took out other pieces that they bring to the table, their concerns. There are other parts of their amendments that have to do more with administrative things that we can do administratively that really don't pertain to this legislation. There was fear, as I mentioned, of people maybe being displaced because now we are processing the fines a little faster than in the criminal. I guess I would ask the question, how many people got displaced during the criminal process because those landlords had to pay the fines and actually had to fix their properties? So I might want to see if there's a number of people that actually got put out because the landlords decided not to fix the property. And what if that would happen now? So a couple of things were what-isms. They brought up a lot of great ideas. And what I wanted to say is that I support what they're talking about in terms of tenants being given unfair water bills. The woman that spoke to losing her daughter in a home that had black mold because through the criminal process, we weren't able to get the inspectors to enforce. We had to wait for the judicial process to take place, and that baby died before there could be anything fixed into that property. She was also trying to get evicted by her landlord illegally with a water bill that went back to before she moved there. So I think that the H.O.M.E.S project is a resource, Ed, where we can get renters who are being displaced, who may not know the rules, and working with them, we can really do this outreach campaign, which is included in what we're saying in the legislation, that we're going to do outreach, public relations to the renters and to the landlords so that they know that they have to register the properties, because that'll be safer if we know they're registered, and that these violations and the system is changing from criminal to civil. It speeds up the process. If anyone were to leave the city because they feel that this is unfair, someone's going to buy that property. But if they're going to evict someone, they still have to follow the law through the eviction. And if that person is displaced, we put in the whereas clause, which is something they suggested, that there should be funding or resources for people to relocate if they don't have the funding and they're being put out by a landlord who happens to be disgruntled. So those are some of the things that we did address in the legislation, and I think there's some confusion around other things that are included in the legislation. But what we did agree yesterday after our meeting is that we're going to go through the amendments, because this was an open discussion with them, and we did this not once but twice, to see if there's any other of those amendments that could fit into this legislation, and if not, that we're going to be working on new legislation to implement some of these great ideas that don't necessarily correlate with this legislation. So we're not opposed.
All right, thanks.
Is it possible to respond just to make sure that it's clear? We appreciate the fact that we were able to have multiple meetings with Council Member Cabrera regarding the blight bill legislation that was, we were hoping to give some amendments to. And just to clarify, we were hoping that the policies that we put forth in this comprehensive plan that was contributed to by members from across the city, that this would actually replace the blight bill legislation. And that was obviously not, that did not happen. And we also had offered a number of amendments that we thought would be helpful to make sure that the blight legislation was as fair as possible and minimize displacement. However, throughout that process, all of the amendments that we offered were not taken into consideration. Although the bill has had some amendments made to it, the bill had amendments made about 15 minutes, 20 minutes before this this group was able to meet to vote on it. And so the public has not had, including the H.O.M.E.S campaign, the opportunity to read through the amendments. So we aren't even clear on what the bill does or says now, despite some of the explanations that was given. And so to be clear about the amendments that we were putting forth, it is unclear whether the funds from the fines that will be pushed through this amendment, that will be pulled through this amendment, will go directly into funds that will come back to our community. That was not answered. It is also unclear whether there will be a hearing that we asked to put directly into the amendment. And we want to be sure that it's understood that we were asking for a hearing to be put directly into amendment so that if a property owner had a violation come in their way, they could have a discussion about what their plan was to remediate it. Not only would that be good for making sure that we're not, we're not just saying we're going to fix something and we don't fix it, but it would be good to know that there is a clear and transparent process. And so that if need be, that hearing could be public and the renter could go and see that they promised that they were going to fix it. Unfortunately, again, we have a long list of amendments. None of those were put into the bill from my understanding. Again, if the bill is going to be amended, I'm really unclear on why that bill will be passed in this committee. If the bill were to be amended. But if there is room for amendments as said so to this bill and not necessarily waiting for another legislation to be drafted and then put through legal and then put through another committee hearing and then put through another vote, it would have been nice to see this legislation be amended. It's been hard to tell whether there has been any support for this amendment with the exception of Council Member Darby and President Congo. It's been just hard to tell if there's been any support for this amendment, these amendments.
Well, I would beg to differ and say that that is untrue, because I myself have sat through 3 of your presentations, and not to mention 2.5 hours of listening to the amendments, and they were explained. They were answered. The questions that you put forth in your amendments were answered by the law department, by the commissioner, as to why or why not they would go into this bill. However, I will read the amendments that have been put into this bill. One of them is that there's an additional whereas clause committing to a discussion of financial and educational programs to support enforcement efforts during the budget process. This is something that you had discussed, that renters need to be educated, and so do the landlords, so that they know, one, about the upcoming legislation being changed from criminal to civil, but at the same time to educate renters and the landlords about the processes. These are not new laws. They already exist in the criminal, but let's just say that they don't understand them in the criminal. At least we're going to make an effort to make sure they understand it in the civil, and how the civil process is going to work now in reference to the criminal. And let me answer your questions in terms of any fines that are collected through the city of Wilmington per the city charter. That's not something I can change. The city charter, all fines that are collected go into the general fund. From the general fund, then you would pull a line item through the budget process, and then those funds could be used for a particular cause. As already mentioned, a whereas clause that would now put money aside for anyone that could be displaced either from this legislation or other issues taking place, including COVID and situations that are happening in our streets, that the mayor himself personally has committed that we would have a budget item to address that. That is something that you specifically spoken to, and getting assistance for what happens to people when they don't have a place to live, if they're evicted and they are displaced. There's another amendment that was added, a requirement that an invoice be sent to the property owner when civic fines are assessed. So that way, the land grab that is spoken of is not taking place. You get the violation, that gives you your notice to fix the property. The inspector is going to circle back and see that after 4, 5, 6 weeks, you did not fix it. So now you're going to get the fine. The fine is $250. You get a letter stating that you have now been fined because you haven't fixed the property. At that point, the landlord can either go fix it and pay the fine, or let it sit without doing anything, and they're going to get fined in increments of every 7 days instead of daily as they would have with the criminal. And they can still contact the inspector, L&I, and they can ask for a hearing. It is mentioned in the legislation that you can still have a hearing before the L&I review board. You can even have a hearing and take this to the court system through the judicial system. So it's not like you're just going to get a fine and you can't do anything about it. There is a process, and you can appeal, and you have 20 days now instead of 10 days, which was the previous legislation had. So a requirement that the violation notice contain the name of the inspector and instructions on how to contact the inspector for additional information or to schedule a meeting or a hearing. That is in section 3438A6. So that has also been amended to include that communication, that people felt that they didn't know how to get a hold of the inspector. And there is a requirement that the violation notice also be mailed to the property manager designated on the rental dwelling business license, not just the tax address, not just the owner, because it's the property manager that has to make those fixes. Those are the things that we put in place. In addition, notification for people who are registering their property for the first time, understanding that maybe when they registered, the city may not have gotten their information, that they will not be fined, that there will be a period, a grace period, for them to get those licensed and register their properties, which is the $500 registration fee for each property. And the only thing not addressed or amended is that we're going to review and revamp the L&I review board so that they then can be better equipped to listen to these hearings. These are amendments that are going to take place before the legislation actually goes into law on July 1st. And we have already committed to sitting down with the H.O.M.E.S group and to go over those amendments that they have and how we can address those amendments either with separate legislation, new legislation, or within some of the of the bills that we already have, the laws that we already have. But for what they are proposing, it doesn't fit into this legislation, which is strictly for landlords to be held accountable to fix their properties or get fined, and to register their property or get fined. Remember, when there was the blight bill, as you call it, now it's the neighborhood stabilization form. There were so many pieces there that included dealing with vacant issues, dealing with property owners, and the community spoke and said they didn't want this. We even included the tier process that many have said they wanted. What happened? The landlord said, no, we don't approve of that. We don't want that tier process. So this has been whittled down to the feedback that was received by the community. I don't know what else to tell you. But we will move forward and continue to work with you to make sure that the things that can be done by the city can be legislated. We will do that, but not everything can be legislated. Some things will be administrated.
Thank you for that. I think we'll take the time to look at these amendments. I know for me, I'm a visual learner, so I like to see it. So I appreciate that you read it all, but I didn't catch it all. We will read it. I think there's also some maybe philosophical differences. As we shared during our presentation, we feel that any legislation put forward around housing should be about protection and investment rather than a punitive approach to stabilizing neighborhoods. So I think that's maybe something we can further discuss, probably not appropriate for the current meeting, but we do appreciate your time.
Sure. And this is one piece, and this is just one piece that deals with that issue. There were other pieces that got put to the side, and if they didn't work, then maybe working with you guys together, let's draft a better piece that addresses the very issues that you're working on that then would fit into that particular legislation versus trying to make all of that fit into this one. And we can do that. I know we can do that. I appreciate everything and all the work that you guys are doing. I'm specifically interested in especially when people are coming out of prison, and that because they have a record or because you have HUD housing, they're not allowed to live there and they just end up being displaced. Then they can't have a job or be able to get a job or have a place to live. I think that is a really big issue that leads to recidivism. So that's one of the things that really struck a chord with me with the work that you guys are doing around that. So, you know, just count me in for all of it. But that's one that's definitely a passion of mine, to make sure that everyone has safe and housing to live and not be treated differently because they made a mistake. Is there anyone else? Oh, I have Councilwoman Darby that would like to speak, and then I think we're going to be wrapping up the meeting.
Yes. I just want to say thank you to the H.O.M.E.S campaign. Thank you guys for the work that you're doing in the community, reaching out to the community, staying engaged, staying on this call, and then being able to present to us. So I just wanted to say thank you guys, and I appreciate y'all and all the work that you're doing in the state and in the city of Wilmington.
Council Chairwoman Cabrera.
Yes, President.
Yes, I just want to make sure that we don't, it seems like there are some people in the public that want to make a comment. I just want to make sure you saw them.
I see Nye, NY Nye. Is there a Nye still present that would like to speak?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, hi. My name is Nye, and I'm calling because, well, I'm making a comment is because it's so many different things going in at one time with this. And there's a lot of that's not being talked about with what's going on, like the rezoning, the commercial turning into residential property. The mayor, for instance, buying property like the Rite Aid building. And with this going on and so many of the landlords, renters, and everybody saying that they want to, they're really to help, but there's some tenants that mess up the properties and they don't want to tell the landlord. And by the time the landlord knows it, then it's an issue. So educating the renters as well, in reference to slumlords. Yes, there's them, but there are also slum tenants that abuse property. And this bill is just stating that, you know, the logistics of, okay, if your paint is chipped, then you go and get the process and everything else. And I also want to know that, for the record, I had made a comment on the last meeting, and I don't want, not that it's going to stop me from making a comment in the future, but all of a sudden I got an L&I inspection come next week. So I'm not going to be intimidated by speaking up in reference to anything that's city council wise, out of the blue. So, you know, I have a very good professional go beyond landlord. So when that inspection comes, I will be filming, because I don't trust not near one. Well, it's a little city council people that that I do after hearing meetings and going in, that I do respect. But as for
20
as
seconds.
Chris in the 7 or whatever, a lot of people should not even, but that's neither here or there. But again, it's so much attached to this, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for speaking. And now we have Ms. Christian Willauer.
Hi, I already spoke. I already made my comments.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, your hand was still up. And now we have Christine Kirkland.
Hi, I'm so glad I stuck around to hear the presentation from the H.O.M.E.S project. And we've been talking a lot about accountability. And this has been my pet peeve for a few years now. I know on my job, I'm a state employee, and I work at the Delaware Psychiatric Center. Somebody was speaking about group homes. However, I know on my job, I'm held accountable to the highest standard for everything I do. And I just can't fathom how come so many people just are not held accountable. And I'm speaking, for instance, the H.O.M.E.S project need to hear this. There is a construction project, training project that is going on at the, it's on Vanderbilt, what is it? Job Corps? Yeah, Job Corps has a construction training program. And when I purchased this house over here on 9th Street, I heard about this great program, East Side Rising. And I went to this wonderful presentation where state officials came and presented this couple of $1 million check to the church. Well, I thought, you know, East Side Rising, that at least some of this money would go into supporting or helping at least the seniors in the community who cannot afford to make upgrades on their property. But I was told it wasn't. Now, this man has all these $1 million of CDC money, and where's it going? Nothing's being utilized. So I had a meeting with them, and I said, well, not for myself, but at least for the seniors, because Michelle Harley was going to pay out of her pocket last year to have an old lady who has cancer, and the rain was coming from her second floor through her dining room ceiling, and she was going to pay to have her roof fixed. So I had a meeting with the pastor over here at the Central Baptist and said, okay, well, we all know these people are going through this training for X amount of months and you're getting paid for it. But when are they going to be utilized? You're just giving them book knowledge. The book knowledge without the actual hands-on means nothing. and they could get the hands on if they went into the community and did this work. However, they could sign a waiver. The homeowner could sign a waiver where they would not be held accountable for any mishaps. And of course, there wouldn't be mishaps if they had a credible person overseeing the work they did. So between them, Central Baptist, and
20 seconds.
And the Job Corps, you know, why can't they get together and for the community and build to make a sustainable community, you know, with these people that's getting this funding and this training. So thank you for my time. That's just a little tidbit. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And as we can see, people are very animated and enthused. And this is a topic that we really, I know one thing for me, I want to make this for my next 4 years here on council, that the housing reform, housing equity, that this is a priority for me. So I really do welcome working together with the H.O.M.E.S people. Thank you for doing the presentation at this meeting and for the presentations that you've been having out there publicly via Facebook, via Zoom. You've had a lot of attendance. So again, I really want to commend the work that you're doing. And I know that you have the support of council members here, the president, Councilwoman Darby, and others that are very passionate about the things that you are putting forth, and that we're going to find resolutions, and we're going to do that by working with you so that you can count on having partners with us. And we will also use our leverage to get other help and other assistance from you from other areas, because this is a statewide issue, a countywide issue. And I appreciate you focusing on Wilmington because of the disparity that does exist here in Wilmington. So ladies, thank you so much. Job well done. And again, you're always welcome to give us updates on what's going on. And I look forward to meeting with you individually. At this point, if there isn't any other business to bring up, I would like to have a motion.
There's one more.
One more person raised their hand. Melanie Trice. Okay, Melanie. You got me there on the closing.
Hi, I'm sorry about that. I just wanted to.
No worries. You're welcomed.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Cabrera, and thank you, everyone. I just wanted to say I appreciate all the work that you're doing with the H.O.M.E.S campaign, and I hope it continues as you're saying. And I know Cheyenne put in the chat about the legal share of the portion of the charter that says fine money has to go directly to the general fund. That was something I mentioned earlier, and I'm really interested about finding a very positive way to use the money from the fines and bringing it back to the neighborhoods that they're coming from. And I hope that can be hopefully part of the not the blight bill, but the bill. And thank you so much for letting me speak again. And I hope you have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, I will tell you that in discussion about this with the mayor directly, he authorized and said that he saw no problem with taking and adding a line item, a budget item to put funding into this initiative. So, you know, all the money goes into one pot and it comes out through the budget process. So it's really about having a line item to deal with this directly. And I'm sure that that's something that we can support in the budget when that is put forth. Okay, at this point, I don't see any hands raised by any of the attendees, any of the panelists. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Can I second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Okay, without hearing any nays, that means that our very first meeting of 2021 for the Community Development and Urban Planning Committee meeting has ended. We definitely had some great dialogue, and I appreciate all the participation of all the members that joined us, and I hope that we can keep you coming and engaged. Thank you all for being here, and with that, I bid you good night and stay warm and stay safe.